In regard to the board licensure examination development from the Office of Professional Examination Services, welcome. Yes, there are going to be two presentations in a row.
You want me to give
Can
you
you
the
hear me
microphone,
okay?
the handheld microphone?
Yeah, that might be better. That might be better, yeah. That might be okay. Because I talk with my hands. Yeah. So good morning. My name is Karen Okasich, and I am a research program specialist in the Office of Examination Resources, Office of Professional Exam Resources. And I am overseeing the exam development processes for the LCSW and the MFT Law and Ethics exam, and also for the MFT Written Clinical Exam. So I've been asked to come today and just present you with a brief overview of the processes that we go through in developing those exams and the method that we use to set the passing score. So to begin with, just a little bit of information about our office and who we are. We are part of the Department of Consumer Affairs, and we exist to provide psychometric expertise in examination development and validation processes to the department's boards, bureaus, and committees. In addition, we also provide management for the computer-based testing that's available to the boards in which you participate. There's an echo, but that's okay. Our mission is to protect the interests of consumers by supporting the department and its regulatory entities in their commitment to establishing and maintaining licensure exam programs that are valid, fair, and legally defensible. So there's a couple of ways that we go about ensuring validity. One is by providing an independent and objective perspective when it comes to developing licensing exams. And then we also provide psychometric oversight in the validation processes that are used. And we do that by adhering to the professional guidelines and the technical standards that have been established as being necessary to develop those examinations in order to meet those criteria of being valid, fair, and defensible. The regulations and standards that we use include the Business and Professions Code, Section 139, the principles for the validation and use of personnel selection procedures, and the standards for educational and psychological testing. And these have been established throughout the profession and by the courts as being necessary in validating exams. Now, when we talk about exam development, we talk about it as a cycle because it is continuous and ongoing. But it does start with an occupational analysis, and that is something that is conducted about every 5 years, and it's required under the Business and Professions Code, Section 139. An occupational analysis is conducted to develop a description of practice. And in performing that study, we are looking to identify what are the main areas involved in performing in a profession. We're also looking at what are the specific tasks involved in performance in each of those areas and the knowledges that are required in order to perform those tasks effectively and efficiently. So the information that comes from that study can be used by boards for a variety of different reasons, but one of the main functions is that it provides the basis for the examination outline that's used to assess whether a candidate qualifies for licensure. So the examination outline serves as a blueprint for exam development. It tells us what content we should be measuring on an exam, and it gives us the weighting of each of those content areas. So by using an examination outline that's based on this occupational analysis, we can establish a direct link between what we're measuring on the examination and the requirements for independent practice. So that document gets used throughout the rest of the examination development cycle. And that includes item writing, item review, exam construction, and passing score. And then at the end, we have an item analysis portion where we verify that things function as they should. So now examination development, when we perform it in our office, is comprised basically of 4 different workshops. And in these workshops, we work very extensively with subject matter experts who are licensed practitioners who are practicing in the field throughout the state of California. And we try to balance according to geographical location, and we invite newer licensees into the process to make sure that we maintain that perspective throughout examination development. Each of these workshops in item writing, we have experienced subject matter experts come in and they receive training on how to write multiple choice test questions depending on whether we're developing the law and ethics or the written clinical. And in developing those questions, we are maintaining a focus on minimum competence. What is the minimum level of competence necessary to practice safely in the profession? We're also making sure that we're reflecting entry-level practice. And we define entry-level as the first 5 years of practice. So on the examination, we're not trying to measure competencies that are gained after 5 or 10 years, but those that are required for the first 5 years of practice. Item writers develop new items based on content areas on the examination outline, and every item is linked to a specific task and a knowledge statement. Oh, and we also develop to the level of application. So these questions are written with a scenario that presents candidates with a situation they're likely to encounter in practice within those 5 years and asks them to make sure that they know how to perform in that situation. So the questions are linked to the examination outline, and then they are also, the key is reference to a published document. Our focus during item writing is on developing new items. However, it's not uncommon that we also come together during that workshop and as a group look at those items and we review them for technical accuracy and make modifications as necessary. Those items, the newly developed items, then go to an item review workshop, which is where we have another independent group of subject matter experts come in. One's different than the people who had developed the question. And they are looking to ensure the accuracy of that question and the appropriateness for the examination. It's basically a 3-phase process that we go through where they look first to verify that the key is clearly the correct answer and that it's clear and accurate. We are also looking at the item stem or the scenario to make sure that it's clearly worded, that it is also accurate, that the flow of information is logical and easy to read. And then we are looking at the item distractors or the alternative response options to make sure that they're plausible and parallel, but that they are incorrect. Basically, in the item review workshop, we want to make sure that the item is in the best shape possible before it goes on to an exam form. Now, I don't have this on the slide, but there's a second part to the item review. And that is that even though these questions are written and reviewed by subject matter experts, we also want to test them statistically to make sure they perform how they're supposed to. So new items become pre-test items, where they're included on an exam form, but they are not scored. Candidates are not told which items these are, and by doing that, we can gather statistics and make sure that they function the way that they're supposed to before we include them as a scorable item in the item bank. Once questions have gone through these processes, they're then ready to go or eligible to go into exam construction. And the exam construction process begins with the testing specialist looking at that pool of items that are performing, and we select from among them based on some statistical criteria. We're looking at a number of things, including when was the last time the item was used, how many times has it been used. And we will take those questions into a workshop with subject matter experts who use the examination outline to select questions for exam forms. So they're ensuring that we have coverage across the different areas, the different task statements on the examination outline, and we actually construct the form and it gets reviewed to make sure that we have adequate representation of different clients, different situations. We're looking for duplication and for cluing. And then once we have constructed the examination, we're ready to set the passing score. Now, there are different ways of setting passing scores. However, when it comes to licensure, those standards and guidelines that we follow have stated that the level of performance required for passing a licensing test should depend on the knowledge and skills necessary for acceptable performance in the occupation or profession and should not be adjusted to regulate the number or portion of persons passing the test. And what that means is that the passing score should be determined based on an analysis and judgment of acceptable performance. The purpose of licensure is to determine whether a candidate possesses the minimum level of competence necessary for safe and effective practice. So therefore, the passing score that we use must incorporate that criteria. And the recommended procedure is a criterion reference passing standard, and that's the one that we use. So there's several steps involved in the process, but we very heavily emphasize that criteria of minimum competence is used throughout each of the steps. And this method also takes into account the difficulty of the exam form. So the passing score may go up or down based on the exam form. An easier exam is going to have a higher pass rate, whereas a slightly more difficult one is going to have a lower passing score. This method, however, is based solely on the knowledge that a candidate possesses. It does not compare candidates in any way. It's a dichotomous decision. Do they possess the knowledge required for practice or not? There is no limit to the number of candidates who can pass or fail. If they possess the level of minimum competence required for practice, they'll end up passing the exam. So once an exam has been administered, we perform some item analyses, some exam analyses. We're looking at how well the exam performed overall, as well as looking at the performance for individual items. Now, we're looking at the end when we perform analyses, we can look at differences in the candidate distribution among administrations. We're making sure that we're being fair to candidates, and we're also concerned with ensuring the reliability of results. So we look at all of those things. Now, we are also performing analyses throughout the administration. So several times each month, we are pulling data and making sure that these examinations are functioning the way that they should. Now, one of the other last things I wanted to touch on when it comes to analyses is that with exam programs, whenever you implement a new exam program or a program changes significantly, it's highly advisable to hold candidate scores and perform analyses during the initial administration to make sure the examination is functioning. You want to be really fair to candidates and make sure it's doing what it's supposed to be doing. So our office, in the case of the written clinical, has recommended that the board hold scores for each of the administrations that has occurred so far. And the reason for that is because there has been some variability in the distribution of candidates, the candidate group who has been taking these exams so far. When an exam has been going for a while, there is a typical group. It's comprised of first-time test takers who will pass the exam, first-time test takers who won't pass the exam, and then repeat test takers who will pass and repeat test takers who will fail. The first few administrations for the written clinical was comprised of candidates who had taken and passed the standard written exam, and some of them had even taken and passed the clinical vignette exam. So these weren't your typical, they didn't fall into any of those typical categories. You would expect in that situation that they've demonstrated a high level of proficiency. So you would expect that the pass rates would be high. And we did see that happen. As administrations progressed, you started having true first-time test takers cycle in, and we started to get that component back that was comprised of those who would pass and fail. So the pass rate dropped a little bit. And as the administrations have continued, we've now begun to see the repeat test takers cycle in. So I know there's been some variability in pass rates that have been seen. It's only been fairly recently that we feel that the data are showing that candidate group is normalizing to what's typical for the MFT group. So that's the conclusion of that. Oh, are there any questions?
Yes. I have, oh, go ahead. You go first.
Okay. Hi, Karen. It's Kim Madsen. So I want to be able. Can you talk about when you're doing the evaluation of an item that's not scoreable, or maybe one that's not performing? Can you talk about how that may or may not affect a candidate? Sometimes we'll hear that you'll see through the analysis that a question's not performing as expected, and so what happens after that point? After that's determined to the candidate, does it count against the candidate? Do we not score it? Just some of those decision points. And I'm asking only because we hear from candidates that that question wasn't worded right, or it was confusing, or there really could have been two answers, and gosh, can you rescore my exam because I'm sure it was not correct. So if you could speak to that.
We are looking at statistical performance, and there's two things we will look at. One is the proportion of candidates who are selecting a correct answer, and the other is a statistic that allows us to tell whether high or low scoring candidates are choosing the correct response. There's certain performance criteria that we look at. At the end of the pretest section, if a question's not performing, it goes back to item review. In terms of candidate comments, one of the things that we see, and when we do the passing score, the subject matter experts actually take the exam. And one of their comments tends to be that they will either not read the question correctly, and so they end up getting another response because they overlooked information, or they read into the question and introduce something that is not in the question. So our data kind of supports the fact that candidates may possibly do that as well. Does that answer your question?
So I have a couple questions, one
Okay.
for you and one that might be for Kim. So my first question is, you were talking about the MFT Clinical Exam. So I was looking at the last quarter, and about 50% of the people passed, or just over 50%. That's a really low pass rate. And I'm thinking, are people getting dumber, or is there something wrong with the test? So my assumption would be something is wrong with the test, that only half the people passed. Do you have any sense of what might have been going on there for that quarter? Because it's hovered between the 60s and 70s in the last 5 years.
Yes. Number one has to do with the fact that we're having more repeat test takers kind of come into the process. We've run analyses on the exam form that's out, and it currently is not in the 50s. It's actually in the low 60s on this administration, so I do see some normalization. And I'm not going to say that you won't have more variability. However, your exam form has also changed, where you went to a standard written that had a passing score in the 60s, and then the clinical vignettes, they've now been combined to one form. So it may not hold to what it has always been in the past. I'm not sure which exam you were looking at.
Yeah, I just find it striking that a year ago it was running in the 60s and 70s from month to month, and this last quarter it was 49%, 51%.
Yeah.
Here would be my
thought.
comment.
Okay.
Yeah,
wanna
Dr. Brew,
okay.
my comment on that would be when we first switched, we have over 1,000 items in the item bank.
Yeah.
Okay, so we switched over and combined the two exams. So the first population that went through on the clinical exam had already taken a standard written exam. So they're going to be more familiar with the domains that we're testing on. So I think that might account for the high pass rate that we saw initially on the clinical exam, because they had already been exposed a little bit to the content and that we're testing for. And I think as we have cycled through and retweaked some of those items through the development process, you're seeing a more accurate reflection of skills and knowledge, as opposed to, gosh, I'm really familiar. Because that first group everybody started January 1st with a clean slate. So if you took that standard written exam in November, or October, you probably had a bit of recall. So and if I'm speaking way out base, please shut me down. But that's how it was explained to us when we started wondering why that high pass rate was occurring.
I'm just thinking of the history of, I've been teaching for 17 years and following these scores when they've been available. And I've just never seen the pass rate at 50% before. So I just felt like, wow, do I need to tell my students you got a 50-50 shot?
No, I think that it's normal. The other information that we're hearing from candidates is the way that they are preparing for the test. Some of the information we're receiving is that they are instructed to read the question, read one answer, go back and read the question, read the second answer, and they're spending a lot of time on those questions as opposed to, what you would normally do if you know something. And so as they get to the end of the exam, maybe they don't have enough time, and so they're sort of rushing through those last several questions, which can or may not impact their score.
So the answer, though, is that you feel good about the integrity of the exam.
Absolutely, 100%.
Okay. So here's a second question related, not directly to speaking to that, but about the exams. So I was thinking, do we ever compare the content areas that we develop for the exams? Because here we're getting experts who are in the field, right, to create the exam questions, to what our curriculum requirements are. And I'm thinking because we have often had presentations from different groups about, or legislation, we need more X number of hours in this particular topic, or X number of hours in that particular topic. And they're all very important topics. But I wonder if there's any sort of feedback loop to say, we've got 7 hours in HIV, and we've got X number of hours in this, and X number of hours in that, right?
Right.
Is it efficacious? Is there a way to, because a lot of times, well, not for the CEUs, but it could be that for people who are looking at portability, we're testing on something that we decided that should go into the law 20 years ago, and people really aren't even needing to be tested on it. So I don't know. I was just thinking the feedback loop.
I'm going to let Dr. Montez speak to that.
Good.
Actually, your occupational analysis should be driving your CE credits and your coursework. Your occupational analysis, again, is your snapshot of what is critical at this point in time. So it should be the foundation for any decisions that you make associated with the requirements, not the reverse. So keep that in mind when you establish CE and things like that. And again, I've been with this program for 20 plus years, and there are blips. I've seen it go down to 40%. I've seen it go up to 75. Again, the goal is to stabilize it, but this is still fairly new. We've done a big change going from CV standard to 1. You've got your test prep folks scrambling out there, giving information that may or may not be accurate. You've got candidates that are stressed because it's new. So our purpose here was just to reassure you it's the same process we've been doing. We watch it very closely. The items, if heaven forbid there is an item that functions unfairly, we will tell the board and do a rescore. That rarely happens because of all the workshops and the monitoring. So as Karen mentioned, usually when you get those comments about questions and the board calls, oh my gosh, they're very, something's happened, we go back, we look at it. If needed, we take it to a subject matter experts, and sure enough, they'll say, well, they did this because of that. Oh, okay. So again, we really watch things closely. And again, we're always happy to respond to candidate comments or concerns. But again, please know it's still a fairly new program.
That's helpful. Thanks.
My other
I was just thinking of the
that.
suicide,
Right.
when the legislation went through, and it's like, okay, how much are we testing for? I mean, that's probably not a good example. People probably have to deal with that every day, but.
What I would say to that is that that's where the licensees come into play. When we send out that occupational analysis, the more response and varied responses we get, we can develop a better exam outline to get a more accurate reflection about what's happening out in the field. If we're not getting the response and it's the same folks submitting it year in and year out, I mean, we can only develop what we're hearing. And so that's when we talk about the occupational analysis, we put the survey and invite folks to respond and participate. That I can't make them respond. So if the folks, the licensees are really, really concerned, one way everyone can participate in that is to fill out the occupational analysis, honestly, because it's that information that we use.
I'm just thinking, would the board be open to changing some of the curricular experience, the CE curricular experiences based upon occupational analyses, like to remove things that might be antiquated?
I don't know what we would have right now in terms of CE that might be antiquated. I mean,
I've never read the occupational analysis, so I couldn't know.
The
I mean, there's a lot of
exam
stuff that I learned that I never used in my practice. So.
Oh, okay. Well, if you go to the website and download the law book, or not the law book, but the candidate handbook, the domains and the content areas, task, skills, and knowledge, that's all right there, and it'll give you the weights. So that's the result of the occupational analysis.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
And we're due to do another occupational analysis for you this next fiscal year.
I just have a simple question. So do you have a reasonable range of passing rate that, when you look at each item, or is that a secret?
We have performance statistics, yes, a range of that, but in terms of how many candidates pass or fail an examination, no.
No, I'm mostly talking about for,
Yes.
say like the MFT, law and ethics, do you have like a reasonable range, to
Yes,
look at?
there's a number of different statistics that we look at, and we pull items from within a range. Yeah.
For example, Christina, if they see through their analysis that one question, nearly a high percentage of folks are not answering it correctly, they'll pull that question from the exam,
Right.
and vice versa.
Yeah, no, I get it. I
Yeah.
totally get it. Because what I'm thinking about is that, I'm, now we have the analysis about each school and, the first time taker and, and then the repeat takers, so how do you relate those individual score, the item score or, in general, like that particular cycle of the, say like the law and ethics compared to the performance, and then how do you determine that, that the certain, whether, it's underperformed or overperformed or we're passing too many people, that kind of, analysis.
We don't have any particular expectations about what percent should pass an exam. That's over time. We look at what is normal, what stabilizes as we're trying to get to for this exam. But for licensure, it's anything between 50 to 75% is what is typical. And as Karen said, we don't do anything to, ensure this many people pass, or we don't manipulate we don't have a quota of how many people should pass. So it's always a floating kind of moving thing.
So between 50 to 70 is, what
Is
you
what
think
we
is
see
acceptable.
for licensure. It depends. A lot of things depend on the type of education
Absolutely.
that's required to sit for the exam. For boards that have very minimal educational requirements, you see lower passing rates. For boards that have higher education, you tend to see higher passing rates. But also when there's multiple types of educations and training, there can be difference that can affect the passing rate. If everyone isn't coming in with the same type of training, then the challenge is to develop an exam that assesses minimum competence, and there could be variations in the training and that people aren't directly hitting all those points that we've determined are minimum competence.
Thank you very much. You answered my question.
I was just going to add, Sometimes it does vary based on who's taking an exam on a particular time. And we do have statistics that we look at where if something happens with the pass rate, we can tell by comparing it whether it's the candidate distribution or if it's something that happened with the exam.
Okay, at this point, I'd like to open it up to the public in case they have some questions. And I know, Ben, you are.
I have a number of questions. Thank you for coming in to present today and to talk about the issues with the MFT Clinical Exam. When we switch the screen here, I'm going to show quarterly data in terms of pass rates for first-time examinees. Yeah, sorry. So the data that's going to be up here is quarterly data of pass rates for first-time examinees. And that first-time examinee part is important because that handles the problem of, the blend of examinees being different in each cycle. Sometimes you have more repeat examinees, et cetera. Okay, can you still hear me? Okay. Looking at this data, you might think, well, the blue line there for the LPCC clinical exam does in fact show that there's some variability. There's randomness between cycles. But the sample size is quite different. In the third quarter of 2016, and these are calendar quarters, not fiscal quarters, in the third quarter of 2016, just 26 people took that LPCC exam. We're talking about a tiny sample size, one that reasonably does introduce some variability. For MFTs taking the clinical exam, we're looking at about 1,000 first-time test takers each quarter. There should be nowhere near this level of variability. And the issues that Tracy mentioned, things like, it's a new exam, we've got exam prep companies that are sort of scrambling, trying to figure out how to best guide people. Well, that's been true since the beginning of 2016. The issue with people who had taken a previous exam, maybe even seeing some of the same items, that might explain the very high pass rate at the beginning of 2016. It's practice effects, fine. What doesn't make sense here is the tremendous drop-off in pass rates for first-time examinees between the end of 2016 and the first half of 2017. And again, we're talking about 1,000, roughly, first-time examinees per quarter. So I have a number of questions related to this. And the first is simply whether to take this at face value, because from what we've been presented today, the exam is meant to address safety for independent practice, period. So, are we to conclude then from this data that after completing their master's degrees and after completing 3,000 hours of supervised experience, that almost half of first-time examinees on this test still are not prepared to practice independently without being a danger to the public? It's not a rhetorical question. It's a serious question.
I would say yes, they're not passing the exam, and it could be too because they've gotten further in their program, or perhaps they've waited to take the exam. Again, nothing has changed in terms of the development, the references, the subject matter experts, so I would be looking at the candidate pool.
The blend of schools. There are, of course, about 80 MFT degree granting programs in California and many others around the country. The blend of how people come from different programs has not changed dramatically. There might have been sort of a gradual upshift in people who have come in actually under the new stricter curriculum requirements that required 60 units as of the beginning of 2012. I hate to think that maybe those extra units made the exam pool dumber. But at face value, you're saying that after all of those requirements on the pathway to licensure, about half the people who complete those requirements still can't practice independently without being a danger to the public. Simply put, that's not plausible. I don't believe that.
Dr. Chu has a question.
I would like to echo what you're saying. My question is it possible for you to run some ANOVA tests with all the subgroups? Because you're saying right now, because the candidates are different, but I think you might be able to run statistical analysis based on different schools or different whatever factors you want to do, and run a statistical analysis and see if a band is correct.
They do run it by schools, by the way. It's in there. It's in the packet. And the schools that serve low-income populations do perform less well than the wealthier schools.
But what I'm saying is, you based on that, you can run a statistical analysis and see whether this discrepancy is statistically significant, or whether you can just explain away, like what you're doing now.
We do, again, provide, or the board provides the data by school. We don't have specific demographic information about candidates. We look pretty much at first-time takers versus repeaters. The board has school information. And I just want to reiterate, the passing score right now, or passing rate, is not at 50%. And I would, again, this is helpful data. Again, we're aware of it. We continue to monitor it. But we haven't changed the difficulty of the test. And so that's what we're trying to explain to you. We have not created a situation to make the test harder. And our statistics and patterns are showing that it's starting to go back up again. So I'm not trying to be disrespectful to those who have the master's degree and the supervised hours, but we have a tool that is in place called an exam. We haven't, again, changed the definition of minimum competency, and so therefore, unfortunately, those who are failing are failing. And we have heard some difference in some information about how the prep schools are coaching students that is different than in the past. So even though coaching schools have been around, we have heard that there is some information given to them that is unsettling in terms of how to approach test questions. That could be a direct impact on how they take the test as well.
Well, sure, but that doesn't explain the suddenness and significance of the drop. A pass rate that's, I believe the most recent quarter there is 56% for first-time test takers, is baffling. Because it does suggest that up to almost half, 44% of the people who have completed all the requirements can't practice independently without being a danger to the public.
So again, when we see these, red flags go off. I mean, we watch this exam weekly, if not sometimes daily. Again, looking at those test questions and trying to determine if there's something going on that's resulting in this. And again, our data has not showed that. We can't go, ooh, we're going to get in trouble at the board meeting, we better adjust this pass score. We don't have any justification for that. Again, if there were items or subject matter experts are saying you're way off, this shouldn't be on the test, or again, a wrong item that's keyed in correctly, yeah, we would make those adjustments. We're just not getting that data. Our data is telling us that the test is performing as it should be, and that there must be a dynamic with the pool of candidates that could be affecting it.
This is not a test performing as it should be.
I still don't understand the argument, because based on statistics, okay, we have the dependent variable, that's the passing rate, and then we have all kind of independent variables. And you can certainly run statistical analysis and see if this is just a fluke or there's nothing to do with anything else, and that's what you're saying. But short of doing such a statistical analysis, I don't see how you can say that, whether it just happened by chance.
Okay. Do you have some variables you would like us to correlate besides the schools?
Yeah, besides the schools and whatever you can think of, the numbers.
So we don't have other variables, is what I'm trying to say. So if you have specific variables, we can see if the board has that information, but we don't collect examinee data. In fact, we are prevented, wherever legal is, from collecting certain demographic data.
But at least from what we know, based on schools, we can certainly still run statistical analysis.
Well, the things that I think that play into this may not be necessarily the schools, but the candidate themselves. How long have they been registered? We have some folks still in the cycle that have probably been registered for 12 plus years. And so when I think about that, they are 12, probably 15 years out of school. So there has been a change in the education. And if they have not kept abreast of that, that's going to impact their ability to pass this test. I'd also like to point out we had some recent data that we left on the back table. But if we look at how that exam is performing since the first of the year, and keep in mind that we're in the second year of the change to the exam cycle. For the first time, test takers in January 2017, we had 60% passing. It dropped to 56% in February and March. We had a low of 51% in April. Now we're trending up in May. It's 56%, and at the end of June, we are back up to 60%. In prior administrations and before we shifted everything, I think our pass rate, and we can go back and look, but I don't think it approached 70% pass rate at all. It hovered in the 60s.
That's sometimes it did approach 70%, but that's
Yeah.
including both first-time test takers
Right.
and repeat examinees.
Right.
Cleaner data comes from just looking at first-time test takers,
Right.
which was routinely between 70 and 80%.
Right. And that's happening now with the law and ethics. And I expect that to hover right around there because the bulk of the candidates that are going to be coming through are recent grads. And so they're, for law and ethics, it's more of a recall rather than I really need to have some more critical thinking skills applied here. So, and I can share with you, having gone to 2 association meetings recently, they prepare their exam in the very same fashion that we do. And it's one of the reasons Oregon has adopted our exam, MFT exam, and it's one of the reasons that the AMFTRB Association is proposing that all states adopt California's exam. But our occupational analysis is only based on California practice. The other 2 exams, it's nationwide. So you are going to see some higher pass rates on those clinical exams. So, I mean, I hear the concern, Ben, and I think the only added, information that we could even provide in comparison would be to look at the number of years the individual has been registered with the board as a first-time taker of that clinical exam, and that might tell us a little bit more about what's going on.
That would be interesting data, and it would tell us something about potential changes in the exam pool.
Yeah.
And I appreciate a couple of things about what you're saying. One is when you look at that month-to-month data, of course it's natural to expect some month-to-month fluctuation. You're getting
Right.
different cohorts, and significantly you're getting smaller sample sizes. We would expect that doing data quarterly like this or by exam cycle would actually smooth out some of that month-to-month variability. So the steepness of this drop from one quarter to the next is particularly alarming, and then for it to stay as low as it has for 2 quarters is alarming.
Right.
Also, given the large sample size per quarters, it's possible, but it seems quite unlikely that we're seeing such a major change in cohort in terms of how long people have been registered before taking the exam, that it would account for this significant of a change. I mean, at the end of the day, there are really only 2 plausible explanations for a change like this with as large of a sample size we have. One is that something major did shift in the cohort, in the people taking the exam. I don't think we've heard anything today that supports that conclusion. If anything, the number of schools and the number of examinees that we're talking about should smooth out variability from one school to the next, in terms of how long somebody's been registered, that kind of thing. The other conclusion is that there is something wrong with the test. And I understand what you're saying about we get this data back all the time, we look at it a lot. The fact that this apparently has been flagged and is reviewed a lot and still has been here for 6 months now is gravely concerning to us. And I appreciate, Kim, that based on your work, you have faith in the integrity of the exam. I got to tell you, based on this data and based on what we've heard today, I don't. I mean, it's concerning enough just philosophically that with passing scores sort of hovering in the 65-70% range, that somebody could get every single legal and ethical question on the clinical exam wrong and still be declared safe enough to practice independently if they get all the questions about middle stage interventions in Bowen therapy correct. There's some logic problem there in and of itself. But to say that almost half of our population does a 60-unit degree, and some of these folks would have done 48, but completes their master's degree, gets through all their supervision, does a test prep course in many cases, and still isn't safe enough to practice independently, barring some other explanation, the most parsimonious explanation is that what we have seen are significant problems in the last 2 cycles of this exam. I haven't yet heard anything today that would lead me to a different conclusion.
What I can do is we can work with OPES, look at some of the candidates that are coming through, because we know who's testing, and then we can in turn tell you how long that they've been registered. And I think that that's going to provide us some interesting information. And because we've shifted in the way we've done our test in terms of how the sequencing is going, most of the law and ethics is in that first exam. Now you're getting into the blending of the clinical vignette, which, as you recall, probably was not, I mean, that had a reasonably low pass rate anyway. So now you're blending that into the more higher functioning questions after you've had your registration for a while. So you're blending those 2 exams. I would not be surprised to see, frankly, just knowing the population that we talk to and the struggles we hear about the exam, I am not going to be highly surprised to find out that it's the folks that have been registered with us for more than 6 years are the ones that are really struggling with the clinical exam, and that could account for a large drop-off. I don't think the folks that are getting out of school, getting their supervised hours within that first 6 years and testing, I don't think those are the folks that are struggling. I think it's the folks that have made a career of being a registrant.
I appreciate your point. It seems unlikely, and I'll wait to see the numbers.
Yeah.
It seems unlikely that there are enough of those folks, and maybe more to the point that there's been enough of a change in the proportion of those folks that would account for this much of a drop-off. Right. And my intention here is not to cast aspersions. People's jobs and promotions and careers sort of hang in the balance. And when you see this kind of a drop-off, you've got hundreds of people, again, about 1,000 per quarter. You've got hundreds of people who are failing by 1 or 2 points. And I have to wonder if it's not the case for a lot of those people that if they simply had the good fortune to test a couple of cycles earlier or a couple of cycles later, would they get that job or that promotion that they are waiting for? When right now they can't or they didn't. Those are the people I'm really worried about here, who I think are caught up in a deeply flawed process.
I appreciate the concern.
We have a couple of questions. If I might just ask one statistical question. Is this the mean score?
This is Ben's.
Okay, but the pass rates that we're looking at, are you using the mean score? Is that the statistical measure you're using, is the mean?
No, it's the actual rate, the number of people who have passed. That's what's on your website.
Versus those who have not?
Correct.
So it would be the mean?
No, it's not the mean. The mean is an average.
Okay.
This is the actual number of candidates that passed the exam.
Percentage of people.
Or percentage.
Okay. See, it would, when we're talking about statistically passed and you're talking about looking at taking different variables and maybe running correlations between the variables to see if statistically they're valid or relevant, do we have like to see what the mean score is, to see what the standard deviation is from the mean? So sometimes not necessarily the number that you're looking at is the best central measurement to actually talk about, because you could have people who are passing at an unbelievable rate and those that are not, and maybe they're two different variables of people, and yet you come in and we say, well, the pass rate's 60%, which gives you the impression that only 60% of all the people, assuming people are all the same, are passing. So, I mean, I think I need personally some more statistics to show exactly where all of the people are falling. I would like to see a mean. I would like to see a median. I would like to see a mode. I would like to see a standard deviation.
It would be interesting to see a frequency distribution
This is just frequency
of actual scores on the test.
Correct.
I don't know how easy that, I don't know that that's possible. I don't know whether we could see changes over time and that kind of thing, but I think that gets at what you're talking about.
Right, because if we're just going to use frequency distributions, I need more information than just frequency distributions.
And here's what I would, to the extent that we can divulge that information without compromising the exam, I'm all for it. Because we're transparent as heck anyway. And so, yes, we'll do what we need to do, but I'm not going to compromise our item bank.
This isn't about anybody's name or anybody's school. This is just looking at the pure unadulterated numbers and putting them into statistical.
Even if
Yeah,
just
and we're
OPES
happy
looks at
to provide what we can
Huh?
as Kim, sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying, even if just OPES and Kim look at that, it doesn't
Right.
have to be public knowledge
No.
to,
Right.
to hurt the.
But then the numbers are just the numbers. I mean, a standard deviation is not going to identify any one person.
Right, and we're happy to work with Kim to the extent we can, but I want to be a little careful because when we start saying frequency distributions and comparison of candidate groups, we're getting away from criterion reference testing. Remember, the standard is minimum competence, what you need to know upon entry level. We're not comparing candidates per se on each other's performance. That gets into norm reference, grading on the curve. So again, we're happy to share numbers with you, but please keep in mind what the standard is for all licensing exams, whether it's BBS, the Department of Consumer Affairs, California, Kansas, New York, wherever. It's criterion reference standard.
Yes, Renee?
You're not on.
Okay. I have a very simple question. One of you mentioned that there was a fairly distressing change in the instruction given to candidates in these ubiquitous prep programs that candidates live and die by.
Yeah.
That they're told, so I wonder, they're told to read the question, go to answer A, reread the question. Well, I think that's a terrible way to take an exam, and I think it would disturb your focus, which has to stay sharp over 2 to 4 hours. Is that correct? So is there a way to query the exam, the computers, to see if people are spending 9/10 of their time on 60% of the questions, so that you can see if that is an issue? I mean, it's a fairly simple issue, really. It's a bad way to take a test. Is there a way to answer that question?
We do monitor certain variables with regard to computer-based the time. Again, we don't want to go into too much detail because that can affect how we monitor security, but we do look at that. And again, I would say that is a variable. When we develop our items, we tell our item writers that the candidate should read the STEM, not look at the options, and after reading the STEM, what they think is the answer should come to mind, then look at the 4 options, and there it is. Not read the STEM, read each option. That chews up your time. So that is contrary to how we develop our items. That could be a variable in a number of variables that are affecting the passing rate.
Thank you.
Leah's had her hand up a long time.
So a couple of things I wanted to know when you guys look at some things is, how long they've been a registrant or when they graduated, because I think that might be a factor if we can look at that. I don't know if you can get this information, but whether or not they graduated from a California university versus an out-of-state. I wonder if the out-of-state people are performing less than people who were trained in state. If you could survey this in the future, did they take a test prep? Like, are people who taking test preps doing worse or doing better? And without looking up who the test prep is, for us to look at and know what's going on. That may not be possible, but I'd be curious to find out. And then I'd want to analyze the difference in categories. Are they doing well on law and ethics, but doing poorly on conceptualization or whatever? Looking at the different areas to say there's one area that over the last 6 months has been consistently weaker than another. I'd be curious to find out.
And then having an
or if
extreme,
it's broken out even. Like, even if the answer is not, I'm not going to tell you what area it is, but some areas people consistently do well and some they don't. Or to say, no, it's pretty random where people do well and don't do well.
aggregate the data. Yeah.
I still want to go back to Ben's question, because the key factor is either the test or the candidates. But at least if we know the candidates, how many years they register, we can run statistical tests. That is, before the passing score being dropped off. Let's say you run the passing rate of everybody got 10-year or 7-year of registration compared to the low passing rate for that quarter with people, with 10 years registrations. So if both come out the same passing rate statistically, then you can say possibly, at least based on this one variable, nothing wrong with the test. But on the other hand, with both groups, the before the dropping of the passing rate for that particular test, people with more experience, with the same experience, they have a higher passing rate compared to the same people with the same number of year of registration, but with a lower passing rate, then raise the question whether there's something wrong with the test. I mean, it's still not conclusive. So the more factors you can think of that you have information on, and you can look at the passing rate for both groups before the drop off the passing rate and after the drop off passing rate, and run statistical analysis about it.
Okay, we'll do that. We'll gather as much data as we can.
Without compromising.
Without compromising the exam, yeah.
So I have a feedback.
Okay,
So
Christina and then Betty.
So being the field supervisor for many years and, working in the field, so I think one of the very important point is the fact that, when the student come out from school, they're trained, based on the curriculum. And when they're in the field, oftentimes what even I find is that what they're preparing, even they went through internship and stuff like that, when they went into the field, the expectation is very different. The level that they require them to work as a clinician. So I think the occupational analysis is what the test is based on, not really necessarily about the curriculum. So there's certainly a gap. Now not that there are any difference, but there's certainly some variation. Now, my experience is also for the interns, they all take test prep, classes. So how much really is also, is about their test preparation process. So I think, it's a little bit more than just, what the school they come from, and I think there are a lot to do with, where they got employed, after postgraduate degree, and also, the kind of the test preparation that they're preparing themselves to go into. So I think that the argument, I hear you, I totally understand, your passion, and the need to advocate for those who just fail one point and are not able to get their license, or have to spend more money to submit to the examination process. But at the same time, when you really look at the grand, the bigger process, I think it's a little bit more complicated than just coming from the school curriculum, which school they come from, to the point that whether they're passing or not. So, so I think we can probably look at the data to death, and yet we're still not really figuring out why particular group of students not passing. Because, when you really look at also the distribution of the school, there's a big variation about public school versus private school, online school versus, whatever. So, so you can analyze it to death. And I think that eventually is how do we prepare the students or the registrant to best, take the test? Is it about test anxiety or what? So I'm just feeling that the discussion is going so far that, we need to wheel it back. And, because it is about the presentation. So, so I think that I would suggest that let's move on and just, have, Ben, you can work with Kim and OPES to really come up with some ideas how we can look at it, look at the data differently.
Okay, so I know we're moving on, but I just had one question that had actually come up when I was sitting out there, and it's kind of still lingering. So if occupational analysis was the critical component to developing the test, and I'm understanding from everyone that that's what's driving the test, as it should, it seems to me like a very critical component of this is that we get a robust response from our licensees. So my question was, what was our response rate to those questionnaires, to those surveys that we sent out? I mean, approximately. I'm not asking for a.
I don't recall, do you? I'm sorry, we don't have the report.
Was it a really robust response, or
it was an acceptable response? If it hadn't been, we would have gone out and resurveyed to get more. Usually for mail outs, we like to see 10 to 15%, which I know sounds low, but that's an acceptable standard for surveys like this. We can circle back, though, and get that for you, because it would be in the occupational analysis report. Also, too, we have demographic questions that are included in the occupational analysis. And again, when we meet with our subject matter experts, we ask them to tell us, is this a peer representative? We try to make sure we sample across all counties in California, lengths of licensure, the various areas of practice, things like that, to make sure it's robust. But again, going back to Kim's point, that's why it's so important to get this out and to have your associations and your schools put it in the newsletters, to broadcast it out, because it's a snapshot of what is going to be used to make some very important decisions. And again, why we revisit this every 5 years. If there's a significant change in the profession, we'll look at it in 3 years. If not so much, we'll wait 7 years. But 5 is sort of the magic number.
I don't recall. Karen, when was our last OA for the MFTs?
In 2002, it was completed in 2012.
Well, okay, so we're hitting that 5-year mark again. So my guess, we're on, because the AMFT group, are they doing their OA this year, or is it next year? I don't remember. Because I think we've talked about doing another OA in the next year.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I know everyone's been really kind of going off on the tangent of the data analysis and the statistics. I guess I'm just coming back to maybe one of the variables that we haven't really looked at is that we don't have a representational data pool, whatever, of people that are actually responding, that we have a somewhat inadvertently skewed sample. And I think it just really behooves us moving forward that I don't know what it's going to take to beat the bushes to get people to respond at a higher rate and a representative sample across the practice. So I'll leave it at that.
Any other questions from the board? Okay.
Hi, my name is Robin Gluck. I'm actually with one of the ubiquitous test prep companies, Therapist Development Center. That is not advice I would give someone. So, but my question is, thank you for asking about the occupational analysis and the percent. I know it's very hard to get the survey responses, and I'm just wondering if there have been thoughts on how better to reach out with all of our technological changes, with your website changing, if there is a way to improve that rate, because I do imagine that it is a very small group and is not completely representative. I've worked in survey statistics and I know that's hard, so hopefully we can get that number up, because 10 to 15% is pretty low still. I am curious to know about, and again, I'm sorry to go back to the statistics, I know you've discussed this, but I am curious to know about the percent of people who aren't actually completing their exams, if that is something that you do track, if it's it seems when I hear concerns from people that is a very big concern for both the law and ethics and the clinical. I know I've heard conversations in here about time being extended. And one thing I'm wondering if there has been a comparison of word count between the California Clinical Exam for MFTs and the ASWB exam. They are both 170 questions. We don't hear the time constraint being as much of an issue for social workers as we do for MFTs. So I'm just curious if that's something that's been done or if it's something that can be done.
In response to about the OA, the Occupational Analysis in 2012, I believe we just did a mail out.
Okay.
So recently, we've started collecting email addresses for our licensees, and we have used that information to solicit information from our licensees. So I would anticipate, we also didn't have a Facebook page and
Right,
a Twitter
yes,
page.
exactly.
So now we have all of these lovely avenues in which to contact our licensees, and we would use those moving forward. And then I will leave the percentage of completion to the psychometricians and the word count. I don't know if we have stats on that.
The timing of the exam is actually based in research, and we have some procedures that are built into the development processes, both during exam construction and during the passing score workshop to ensure proper time. We don't necessarily specifically look at timeout for a variety of reasons. We do have some comparisons in place. However, we don't compare against exams that are not a written clinical that are used for a different format. But we do have multiple processes in place to check for adequacy of time.
Okay. I mean, the social worker, I'm not as familiar with the social worker exam, but that is also a clinical multiple choice, right? They are very similar in style.
I have not evaluated the social worker clinical exam.
We have the director of the social work examination program here. Yes, it is a 4-hour exam.
Mm-hmm.
Goes through the same rigor that we do. Are you 175, 180 questions, Mary Jo?
70.
170 questions. So it's the same. Yeah.
Right.
So I mean, it's the same.
Yeah.
It's the
So I'd be
same.
curious to know length. I mean, it sounds like you go through a rigorous process, but I'd be curious to see, because that is a very common question. And one of the issues that has always been raised here in the past is that in clinical practice, we are not under those time constraints. And so the fact that people might not be passing because they're running out of time is maybe not representative of how we work in practice and is not the most effective way of measuring somebody's competency.
That's helpful, and I would just, as the exam evolves, please let us know if you keep hearing those comments, because it is feedback that we put into the process.
Yes. Thank you.
Hi, Jerry Grossman, and I have a prep organization. And first of all, I do want to continue the discussion about people being time pressed on the exam. The exam is currently a combination of the former written exam and the former clinical vignette exam, and the items that are multi-part are more complex than the single item one. So one question I would have would be, is there a percentage on the exam that of single item ones versus multi-part ones? And it also, does that percentage remain the same between different administrations of the exam? Because that could be a factor in whether somebody is going to finish them or not. A common response to people taking the exam is they were really time pressed. So I don't know if being time pressed really meets the criteria of somebody showing their competency professionally. And so the idea of looking at word count, looking at the mix of single item choices versus choices that have multiple parts, I think would be a useful thing to consider. Also, in terms of time crunch, a lot of people taking the exam, English is not a first language. So what I would suggest is that there be looking at how are questions worded. Are these questions devoid of idiomatic expressions that in fact could be confusing to people when English is not a first language? And I know that there's discussion in committee about extending time for ESL people. I think that could be a factor in what's going on in terms of exam rates. Another thing in terms of statistics, traditionally when the orals was around, and I would predict for this current exam, people's weak areas are treatment planning and treatment. And so I think it would be useful to have the information about what are the percentage of questions being answered in the 6 domains on the MFT California Clinical Exam. And because that could be useful to candidates. So somebody who's taking the exam and they realize that they're not doing well in a particular area. And you know what is going on in terms of the overall distribution and percentages in these 6 areas. Another question I have is, like, there is a clear methodology that's been presented by the Office of Professional Exam Services, and I appreciate the concern and the thoughtfulness that goes into this. I'm wondering if there is the possibility of having an outside organization who is familiar with examination construction to look at the methodology being used to see if in fact there may be a blind spot in the methodology that could improve the validity of the exam.
If I may.
Yes.
These ladies are all psychometricians.
Okay.
That's their bailiwick. They develop exams. They understand the statistical analysis. They understand how to create an item. How they develop the exam is no different than the psychometricians that help develop the ASWB exam or the MBCC exam. And all 3 entities use the same standards, criterion reference, everything. So having an outsider come in and question their work is really, it wouldn't be fruitful. You're going to get the same response. Everybody on all 3 levels has to have a legally fair, valid, and a defensible examination. And the only way you can get that is by using a psychometrician, which is what we do. So there's that. I also have a question about, because you talked about a single content and multiple content areas. I don't even know what those are, those questions. And so I don't know if you're getting that feedback from the candidates or if you are aware of questions that are on our exam.
No, I'm not aware of questions on the exam. What I'm talking about is that if you have an answer choice with 1 item in it, like A, B, C, and D having 1 item, and then another choice where there are multiple parts to A, like where you have 2 or 3 components to A, and therefore B, C, and D would also have multiple components.
Right. My understanding, it's a multiple choice question with a couple distractors with 1 right answer and 1 almost right or a plausible answer. So, yeah, I didn't know we were looking at single and multiple answers. That's interesting.
Would you like me to? I'd like to add a little, if I may. Again, when the exam is constructed, it is balanced in terms of the types of questions, the content of the questions. Each form that is created, again, there's a very extensive process where Karen goes in and pulls items to cover the exam outline, and then when she's working with the subject matter experts to create the final form, she is balancing out the types of questions, the content of the questions, because again, you have a very diverse profession. So again, lots of thought. And if I may add a little bit too about our credentials here. We would welcome, independent scrutiny, but we'd hate for your board to have to pay for that. Just so you know, we have been scrutinized by other vendors. We've had to defend our work to other peers, other psychometricians. We've gotten up at multiple board meetings and made presentations like this. We've had to go into legislators and explain Business and Professions Code Section 139. And we also, Karen herself, we've worked with the Little Hoover Commission and survived scrutiny of the acupuncture exam, and our exam was found to be better than the national way back when, and I like to brag about that because I don't always have that opportunity with Karen here. We've also been challenged in an administrative court situation, and our methodology has been upheld. So we've been through the ringer, and so again, we take all this feedback very seriously. It affects us when we hear that folks are not getting licensed. Okay, we take that to heart. As I said, we monitor this very closely. We've gotten some great feedback. We're going to work with that in the process, and hope that you see some passing rates that reflect the true group of candidates that are going through the process soon. So thank you.
Yeah, and I agree, and I think a lot of it is associated with a lot of test anxiety and such, but I appreciate all the feedback. Honestly, it's not that it's falling on deaf ears. We'll gather some more data, information, and present it at the next meeting.
Thank you.
Any other comments?
I want to make one comment that, just to reiterate that the process, which is used by all testing providers who follow the psychometric standards, the process depends on the participation of subject matter experts. So, we are hard pressed to explain some of these issues that you're presenting to us, because when we develop exams, we are using the expertise of the licensees in the field, and so they are writing the questions. And to answer, your question about are they timely, are they reflective of what's going on in the field? Well, we have people who are working in the field writing the questions, reviewing the questions, setting the passing score, telling us this is what we believe is minimum competence. So, we are concerned, and we are going to look at any factors that we can. But if there is some kind of disconnect between what subject matter experts are providing to us and what's going on in the educational process, then of course we want to determine if that's a problem, if there's some kind of disconnect there. And we are going to be working on the next OA soon, and so we'll, work hard to get a high response rate. But it is hard now to get people to respond to surveys because they get so many surveys, and it's so easy to send out a survey, as we all know. So it is hard to get a good response rate. However, our process, we have factors to compensate for that by having workshops. The OA is not solely based on survey data. We have subject matter experts come in to review and the task statements. They review the task knowledge statements. They review the survey data. So all of that process is developed with groups of people. So we're not reliant on survey data exclusively to determine what goes on to the test.
It's like an option. Anybody move? No other questions, comments? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation, and we appreciate all the comments that were given. And get back, correct?
Yeah. I'll have a follow-up at the November board meeting.
Okay. Next on the agenda, we have a presentation. Monahan, who is the director from the Association of Social Work Boards. She's the executive director, has a presentation.
While we're setting up, I would like to say thank you to the board for inviting me to come out. I was here in 2014 when we were first discussing the return of the state of California to ASWB membership. We were very excited about that, and very excited that California was going to return to using our exam. We had been a member for quite a few years and then left us and then came back, and so we're very excited that you're with us. We did start administering the exam in California in January of 2016, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how that's going. And just please hear that we're very excited that you're back with us. Not having the second largest state that was testing social workers was a gap for us, and we missed you all, and we're very glad that you're back with us now. So I've been invited to come and talk to you about mobility and portability, which has been a hot topic for quite a while, and hopefully we're all finding a way to make it happen, I'd say, in our lifetime. But lately, I've got to tell you, I'm changing that to it's going to happen in our lifetime, even if it kills us. So it's quite complicated. It's changing all the time, and it's an issue for all regulated professions, and professions are going about it in different ways. The healthcare professions, we're trying to be as similar as possible, but of course there are variations. So I hope to speak to this and also answer any questions that you may have. I feel badly that my side is to the board members, but okay. Where am I? There we go. I'd like to cover these three areas with you, and because they're all interrelated, and that's one thing about mobility and portability. It's not a current issue. It's been an issue all along. We're just paying attention to it now in a different way. So I'd first like to go over some ASWB exam updates with you, and I'm so grateful for the last presentation, because everything that you guys are doing, that's what we do for you as well. And so I'm glad I don't have to talk about differential item functioning and all of that kind of stuff, because you already had a wonderful workshop on it. Then I want to go into the electronic practice standards, because telehealth and the electronic practice is really what is motivating a lot of the need for the portability and the mobility. So I want to talk about that, and then we'll get into what is ASWB's mobility strategy. And we were calling it a plan up until about 3 weeks ago, and then we had our mobility task force have another meeting, and we decided to call it a strategy rather than a plan, because you can change a strategy and be more efficient and effective and responsive if you're looking at a strategy rather than a plan. Okay, so language is important in all of this. Where am I? Over there? Okay. All right, so for those of you, here's an introduction to ASWB. ASWB is a not-for-profit organization, and we serve the social work regulatory boards in all 50 states, in DC, U.S. Virgin Islands, Guam, Northern Mariana Island, and when I was here in 2014, Guam and Northern Mariana Islands had not joined us, but they're now part of the family, and then the 10 Canadian provinces. ASWB, as a not-for-profit, has to have a charitable purpose, and our charitable purpose is relieving burdens on governmental entities. So our job as ASWB is to relieve the burdens on you as a governmental entity, and that's how we're organized, and that's what our purpose is. We were formed very briefly back in 1979 when there were about 12 states that were regulating the practice of social work. They got together and said, we need a criteria, we need an exam, and we don't want to have 12 different exams for practice. And so they came together, and with the help of NASW, they formed a new organization that would be the regulatory arm of social work, and that's ASWB. So we're going to be celebrating our 40th anniversary soon, and so we've been around for that long. Okay. We have one shared purpose with all of our members, and that is protection of the public. So this is the mission of ASWB. The mission is to strengthen protection of the public. And the way we do that is we provide the support and services to the social work regulatory community. And over the past 5 years since I've been at ASWB, we have expanded the definition of the social work regulatory community to include more than regulators. We see that social work regulation is really on a continuum that includes social work educators who are working with the students right from the beginning, and orienting students to the fact that social work is now a regulated profession. We also see social work practitioners, those who are practicing, who have become licensed, who are the supervisors out there, who are supervising applicants to become licensed. So we include them, as well as all of the social workers out there who are licensed, that they're also part of the social work regulatory community. You just don't get your license and then forget about regulation. And the ending purpose is to advance safe, competent, and ethical practices, which is what we've been talking about today already. So here are the 3 pillars of the profession: education, practice, and regulation. And each pillar has the shared values of social work, the social work profession, but different missions. Educators educate and also approve schools of education. The practitioners form the practice, but also advocate for the profession as a whole, and that's what NASW's job is. And then the regulators are us. One of the things that we have now come up with through our program in working with schools of social work is to get licensed and live licensed. That social workers who are licensed, our relationship with them is a lifelong learning, that they go to school, they get their supervision, they get licensed, and then hopefully they stay and live licensed and are under the purview of their regulatory board for that long-time relationship. Okay. I do have some exciting news to tell you about interesting collaboration between the Council on Social Work Education and ASWB. And CSWE has started writing what they're called curricular guides. And the first one that they have produced was around Gero Ed, or education around the elderly, and bringing that into the social work curriculum and classroom. The second one that they're working on right now is military social work as a specialty. As soon as I saw that, I called up Darla at CSWE and I said, Darla, I have an excellent idea. Let's write a curricular guide about regulation and licensing. And she said yes, so we will be writing that starting next year in February of 2018, and we will need subject matter experts to help us write that. And it will be based on the EPAS standards, which is in social work education, are the practice standards, the competencies that every social worker needs to master while they're in school and then demonstrate that upon graduation. So we will be taking those standards, the educational standards, and blending them with what we know about regulation and writing curriculum to bring it into the classroom. And that will be available to all of the schools of social work in North America, which we're very excited about that. So that is going to help with the understanding of social work as a regulated profession right from the beginning. Just like all nurses know that when they enter their profession, they're going to become licensed. Doctors and dentists know that. We hope that that will happen with social workers as well. Here's some current stats. Right now in our count from 2016, there are 483,207 regulated social workers And you can see the numbers in the US and then in Canada. And that's a 34% increase since 2006. So you can see that when I say we're a regulated profession, yes, we are, and that's good for the profession. Okay. And again, there's just a chart of the same thing, and the trend is up. And what we know from the Bureau of Labor Statistics is that social work is predicted to continue its growth spurt of another 24% over the next 20 years. So you're still going to be in business. We're all going to still be in business. Yeah. Okay. Here's social work is regulated in all of the 64 jurisdictions that I talked about who are our members. Clinical is regulated in all 50 states, DC, Virgin Islands, Guam, Northern Mariana Islands, and then 3 of the provinces in Canada are now regulating at the clinical level in addition to the registered level that they do in Canada. The MSW is regulated in 46 states and all 10 provinces. And just briefly, the provinces have a RSW categorization or credential, if you will. It's a registered social work, and all social workers, when you graduate from a school of social work in Canada, you become registered. Okay, and now they're adding the clinical category. And then BSW is in 41 states and all 10 provinces. A trend that's happening is that social work is being regulated at all 3 categories in all of the states, and we encourage California as well as Florida. Those are the 2 of the major states that still only license at the clinical category. We encourage you to think about regulating the full profession of social work. And I'll be glad to talk to you about that. Okay. Here's some info on exams. And as you know, we have 4 exams that ASWB offers: a bachelor's, a master's, an advanced generalist, and the clinical. You use the clinical exam. But as I mentioned, the other states regulate at the other categories, so we have exams for those categories. You can see the numbers administered, and again, it's an increase, and actually we are experiencing about a 7% increase every year in the number of exams administered. When you have big numbers like this, you can get good statistics and good standardization, except for that advanced generalist exam. If you see, the advanced generalist is an MSW plus 2 years experience, postmasters, but non-clinical. And then we were lobbied to do an exam for the macro social work practice. This is the exam we came up with. But many of the states say the master's exam is just fine for that. And so they're not using it. I think the AG exam is only used in about 5 states, and that's why the numbers are low. So the reliability is there, the validity, it's a legally defensive exam, but it's not very much used. And that's going to be a factor in mobility, because the folks who have taken that exam most likely are going to have to take the master's exam again. So don't do that category out here, okay, please. Okay, here are your numbers. We're very excited about the numbers. California started using our clinical exam in January of 2016, and the total for 2016, we had predicted 2,000, that we were going to have 2,000 exams, got pretty darn close with having 1989. Okay, so far, this year and through July of 2017, you're already at 1620 exams. So we're going to most likely exceed the 2,000 for this year. So and I want to thank the staff for working so well with my staff. I know the folks that were just here. The first 3 months were transition, and we got through it. Okay, and since the second, third, and fourth quarter went very smoothly. And I hope your candidate or your social workers here are pleased with that change. Okay. Now, guess what we've just been doing for the past 2 years? We call it a practice analysis. And every 5 to 7 years, ASWB does a new practice analysis, and then we change our exams every 5 to 7 years to stay current with current social work practice. Everything that your staff just said is how we've been conducting our practice analysis over the past 2 years. The practice analysis, the prior one, it was based on surveys that were about 6,500 surveys. This time around, we did what we're encouraging you to do is we had 26,000 surveys answered for our practice analysis, and talk about lots and lots and lots of data, because each practice analysis, each survey takes about 3 hours to accomplish. And so for that many social workers throughout North America and the islands to take the time to do that, we feel really good about the data that we have for our new exams going forward. I will, well, I don't want to take you, I'd love to take you to our website, but I'm not sure we have the time or if I even know how to do it, zapping on here. But please go to our website, and we have great information there, and please tell your candidates to go there so that their anxiety level will be manageable about the new exams. The clinical exam, there's an analysis on if you, the middle, if you tap on that, you can see the changes in the blueprint, the analysis for the clinical exam from the current one. And most of them are minor changes. And if there was there's just a percentage difference in the categories. All of this is laid out in the practice analysis that we publish. That's online, you can get it. So those of you who want to have bedtime reading that I can guarantee may put you to sleep, go read our practice analysis. Except you guys, because you'll love all that stuff there. So what's different on the blueprint? You can also see what's different for each of the exams, and then the timeline. Our goal, and we will meet the goal, is we are launching this January 1, 2018. The practice analysis is there. The new exams have been constructed. We have added supplements to our exam guides that we provide for folks to understand the exam. Our exam guide discusses how the exam is written, and so that you know how to prepare yourself. We also have practice exams. Those have been updated, and the new practice exams will be launched in November. So anyone who is planning to take the new exams and preparing for it in January 1, there will be new practice exams. Anyone who doesn't want to take the new exam needs to get signed up with us ASAP so that we can make sure that the crunch that we're going to have in October, November, and December of people trying to take the old exam rather than the new exam, that we can help accommodate you at all of our test centers. So my staff is geared up for the last 3 months of this year to be helping people get into the test center at the time that they would like. But we need people not to wait until the last week of December and say, I want to come take the old exam. Okay, you're not going to be able to get into a test center, so we know that. So please put that out. The new exam will be, so the practice exam is, the new practice exam will be in November, beginning of November, and we are also preparing new exam guides, but there's a supplement to the exam guide right now. Okay, any questions about the exam moving forward, because I want to get to mobility. Okay, it's exciting. We want, you know, your folks to understand that the new exams are not for anyone who's currently licensed. I made a presentation at an NASW chapter in Illinois, and I've got all these questions, people thinking everybody was going to have to take a new exam. And it's like, no, no, no. If you're licensed, you've done that. You know, this is for candidates who are not licensed. All right. So this practice mobility and license portability thing that we're all dealing with, we've actually been dealing with it for quite a long time. And I want to go back to, I said that ASWB was birthed because of wanting to have an exam, okay? And that's how we came into existence, and now we're catching up on the mobility. Many other professions started out the opposite way. For example, pharmacy and accountancy, who have been around for many, many more years than us, they started out for mobility. They were asked by their members, their states who were regulating pharmacy, back in the early 1900s, they were asked to set up their ASWB of pharmacy to help them have mobility, practice mobility and license portability across the states. So they started out with that and then added an exam later on. So part of what ASWB has done is we've looked at all the professions. We've looked at the docs and the nurses and the pharmacists and the accountants and seeing how other people are doing their mobility. And actually, the model that I'm going to be presenting to you, or the strategy that I'm going to be presenting to you, is much more akin to the pharmacy and the accountancy model that started out with mobility. Because ASWB over the last almost 40 years has been providing products and services to our members that do support mobility, even though we didn't know we were doing that. But now as we look back, what we realize is so many of the services that we have for our members are all going to support mobility. So we don't need to go and create another compact. Okay? And many, the docs and the nurses and some others are going the compact route, but we've decided that we don't need to do that. We can work with our members with the current services that they have, with some variations on it. So the real drivers of change for mobility and portability is really e-practice, okay? And the physical mobility of social workers. We know that social workers are moving more now than they did 10 years ago. Okay? But the real driver is electronic practice. At ASWB, we're looking at everything through the lens of mobility. Okay, this is just a slide that says it's here, we need to be dealing with it. Also, military family licensure problems probably is the stories that we get the most about. You know, military families move a lot, and the military social workers move a lot, and very often if you're a social worker, you may be married to another social worker, and so the hoops that they have to jump through, we have been asked to take a look at. So what we decided was we need to start wrapping our arms around technology, and that's what our members were also asking us for. And so back in 2015, 2014, we convened an international task force to look at technology, and we conducted the task force through technology. And very often when we would have our meetings, somebody was in their bunny slippers because they were meeting with us at 2 o'clock in the morning. Dwight and I spent many times at 8 o'clock at night having a meeting with social workers so that we could have the folks from Canada, the folks from Ireland, we had England, we had Australia and New Zealand all participated in the technology task force for regulation. Okay, we were looking at regulation for technology. So what we had found that Technology is offering unprecedented opportunities to practice across jurisdictional boundaries, and it's not just North America now either. We have social workers practicing in Germany. So we know it's happening. There are great benefits to clients and practitioners, but also new ways of causing harm or getting into trouble. Okay, and that's where the regulators come in, as well as practice standards. So we want to have a safe, competent, ethical practice of social work using digital and other electronic technology. So these are the model regulatory standards for technology and social work practice that we published in March of 2015. And hopefully if you have made any changes in your laws around technology, you will use this as a resource. We have gotten very positive feedback, and this is part of our thinking around our mobility strategies, is based on these standards. There are 7 sections in the standard, and go up on our website, you can download this. It's there for our members, but also any of you can also go to our website and download it. We looked at these 7 sections and wrote regulatory standards. So the language in this regulatory standards is different from the practice standards that I'll talk about in a minute. But we think we hit and included what you need in order to incorporate good practices around technology for your licensees. Okay. Probably the most important one is the last one, electronic practice across jurisdictions. And basically what we said in there and what we recommend is that the social worker be licensed in any jurisdiction where they are practicing physically or where they are practicing virtually or electronically. Okay? And that is respectful of regulation as a state's rights issue. Okay? So yes, if social workers are going to use e-practice, we are recommending that they have licenses in the multiple jurisdictions where they are touching clients, because ultimately what's our function is protection of the public. Okay. So once we did this, we also helped organize with NASW the technology and social work practice standards that desperately needed to be updated because they were 10 years old. And if you took a look at them, you go, oh my God, did they know that there's a thing called the web? You know, and it's like, well, it was 10 years ago. It was a different animal than it is. So this was historic that 4 social work organizations were able to come together and create one document. It took us a little bit longer than we thought, but that's because, you know, we had 4 organizations. But we got it done, and they were produced, and they're out for public consumption now, and they're on the websites of all of those 4 organizations. I'm looking at Jan Lee with NASW here. NASW has the hard copies. If you would like hard copies of these standards, go to NASW, but you can download the document from our website, and I hope you do. The standards there's 2 sections. There's the standards section that makes a statement about what the social worker should do. It offers general guidance on how to use technology in an ethical manner. Then we put in an interpretation section for each of the standards that's a discussion of suggestions for implementing the standards in a wide range of circumstances. So it's a very helpful and useful document. Originally, the old one was about 15 pages. This one is close to 60 pages of standards. and discussion with a very nice bibliography. So if you're a social work educator out there, this is the new document you need to have in your arsenal. And just real briefly, there were 4 sections. We started out with 6. We went down to 4 after we went out for public comment. And these are the 4 sections. I'm very pleased with the second section, which is the design and delivery of services. And we divided it into 2 chapters, if you will. One which is more looking at individual families, groups, individuals, families, and groups, which is more your clinical practice. And then we have a whole macro section in there about working with communities, organizations, administration, and policy. And you may say, well, how is policy, why do they need electronic practice standards? And it's like, oh, they do too. You know, I always say that policy experts can harm more people with one decision than an individual social worker or any clinician could do in their lifetime. So that's why we added it there. So those are 2 documents that we believe are part of a mobility initiative, a mobility strategy that grappling with helping individual practitioners know that if they're practicing electronically, it's a new area of expertise that you need to develop the expertise of how to practice electronically. You can't just say, I've been a good clinician, now I'm going to plug into using electronic practice. Okay. Just had an experience of sending an email to one of my board members and getting an email back that we both went like this. Okay, it's like, whoa, that's not what I said or meant with that email. And whoa, that's not what the person who is responding to me, the response that I got back. And it really was a misinterpretation of words in the email. And my thought was, I'm not practicing as a clinician anymore, but man, oh man, how misinterpretation with a client, particular client in distress, that you really need to know what you're doing on that. I immediately picked up the phone and called my board member and said, I think we got our wires crossed, and let's work this out. So that's why we've spent so much time on the electronic practice. Okay, so at the back table, I put a copy of our mobility strategy. And so this is literally hot off the press because the board approved it yesterday at close of business. The board approved this, and so I was able to bring it in today and make copies for you. So I hope, we call them living documents, because I'm sure before we go to our delegate assembly, which is in November of this year, where we will be putting it in front of all of our members, we'll probably wordsmith it a little bit more. But right now, as of today, this is our plan. And what I want to do is walk you through it. But here's the definition of mobility is the ability to get an equivalent license to practice social work in another state or province. And actually, on this document, we refined it a little bit more, and we're referring to the physical and virtual mobility of social work. So we're combining the 2. As you know, in order to get licensed, there are 3 main requirements. We call them 3 E's and all the fees. Okay? So the first is an education, and in social work, what's accepted by jurisdictions is BSW, MSW degree from a CSWE accredited program. a high-stakes exam, those are the exams that ASWB provides, and then professional experience. And not all of our categories require experience right out of school. Like the BSW is, you get your education, but you get experience as part of your school program. Okay, so the clinical exam, where we find the biggest variation in social work in terms of experience is with our clinical exam, and it can be anywhere from 2,000 to 3,000 hours post-master's experience. Okay, but all the clinical exams require something in experience. Okay, so that's a little background. Here's another resource that ASWB produced back in the 90s, and it's called the Model Social Work Practice Act, and I know California has used it. And basically, it's a template for anything and everything that good regulation of professional practice is, and basically how to set up your licensure law. And we review this every year. We have a committee that looks at it, and we review it and update it so that the template is keeping tabs with what is relevant for the regulation of social work practice. Okay, so those are two important documents or ideas that form the basis of the strategy. So here it is on one page. The purpose is to expedite the licensure process for not your initial license. Okay, you have your initial license. We're not dealing with initial licensure. It's already set up and it's been working just fine. This is to expedite the licensure process for multiple or licenses around electronic practice. Okay. We looked at, again, all the other professions that I'm saying, and here are the categories that and the criteria that are basically in all of the other mobility plans, whether it's psychology, the nurses, the docs, the others. Okay. In social work, we are looking at the 3 categories of license, and I have another slide about outlining those, and then 4 criteria. And the standard application, we're taking that one out, okay, because states want to have their own application process. But the more standardized it can be, the better it will be for everybody. And in our Model Act, we suggest what should be in a standard application process, okay. A centralized licensee data bank structured on our existing social work registry, and I'm going to get to that. Okay, so here are the 3 categories, and we have an LBSW, an LMSW, and LCSW, and that's what's in the Social Work Practice Act, and that's what we're saying is, in order to expedite secondary licensure or more licenses, we need our members to agree that these are the 3 categories. Okay. Right now, in the past 38 years, what has happened in social work is people have strayed from the Model Act, and we now have 56 different titles for social workers throughout the United States. So that's not going to facilitate equivalency. So what we're suggesting is that in order for our members to have expedited processes, they don't have to change their categories, but we have a cross map that I'm going to show you that takes all of the different categories and puts them into one of these 3 areas. So you don't have to change your current initial licensure titles that you give, but if your person is going to move, the second state that they move to will use this framework. Okay. So then the 4 criteria are graduation from an accredited social work program. Okay, and that right now is pretty uniform across all of our members. A passing score on the appropriate exam, that's nationalized, okay. Completion of supervised experience. So if it's a clinical license, you're going to have some kind of supervised experience, okay, and that's what everyone has agreed to. And then no reported disciplinary action. So you got your person who's been licensed, no matter how long they've been licensed, in order to use an expedited process to get the second, third, fourth license. These would be the criteria that would be used. Okay. I had lunch with Kim yesterday, and she told me that the marriage and family therapists and the mental health counselors are having similar discussions, and I was so excited that we may be able to show some consistency, not only across our jurisdictions for our social work members, but for the boards that are consolidated boards or umbrella boards like you are. And that's a trend that we're seeing. Social work is getting involved in more consolidated boards as well. So the government's going to want us to figure this out on our own. Okay, so here's some data that we have collected over the years about our exam score transfer requests. Because we said, what's the problem that we're trying to solve with mobility? Are social workers really moving from one jurisdiction to another? And I think you can say, yep, they're moving more now than they used to. You know, of 45,000 social work exams given in 2016, 6,300, there were 6,300 requests to transfer that exam score to another jurisdiction. Okay. So what we've been able to do is do an analysis, because we have updated our website and we're much more digital than we used to be, and we now are keeping a lot of our data electronically, and we have kept data on the 2016 and 2017 exam scores digitally so we can analyze it in an easy manner. So what we're doing is looking at where are the states that have this high volume of traffic, if you will. And guess what? New York's number one, and I think you guys are number two on the traffic too. But we're analyzing that to see what states have a higher volume. They are going to be more interested in a mobility strategy than the states like Mississippi that maybe gets 2 people in a year. Okay, so they probably don't need to change a lot of things in order to accommodate those 2 people. But again, if they would use our templates about the 3 categories, it would make it go faster. Okay. Okay, so here's some of the current resources that we have developed over the years that we believe already support mobility. Our exam program, our public protection database, and and you report to it. But the public protection database is any disciplinary action that goes through the whole process and becomes a disciplinary action is reported to us, and we gather all that data in our public protection database. We also will report it to the national database if you would like us to do that. Some states ask us to do that for them. Others say they are required to do both. So we have the public protection database, and in there are over 6,000 social workers who have had disciplinary action, and I think we're almost to 9,000 complaints. So those 6,000 very often have multiple complaints on them. So that's why those numbers are different. When someone moves into your state right now, you already checked the public protection database, okay? You do or you don't?
Well, we fingerprint both. So, and then we research whether their license is valid.
Right. So that's how you can know if someone is coming into your state and whether they have discipline or not, or if they're not being quite truthful on their application form. Okay. So we and our public protection database is as good as the reporting from our members, but we do a lot of follow-up to our members to get them to be as current as possible. And if we can help them and do some of that reporting for them, we do. So we're pretty confident in that that's a good service that we offer. The Model Social Work Practice Act that I keep referring to, the technology standards, we have an ACE, approved continuing education program that California accepts, and we approve providers of CE. We do not approve the individual programs. If the provider has been approved, then you can have confidence in their individual programs. The only state that we do individual program approval is New Jersey, because they have asked us to do that process for them. Okay. We have the Path to Licensure campaign, and real briefly, that's a campaign where ASWB works directly with the schools of social work to infuse regulatory training and understanding into the curriculum, and that CSWE curricular guide is going to help that. And then we have the social work registry, and that's what I want to talk to you about next. That's the database that we're talking about. Okay, here is the cross map that we came up with, and what we did is we took all of these 56 different titles and from each of the states, and we put that into this cross map. So California, you only have one title, so, and it's in clinical. So, but all these other folks that are coming to you, you would just look up, say if someone comes from Texas, or let's go with Missouri. Okay, look at all the titles Missouri has. It's the second to the last. I don't know if you can see that. Okay, what we did on this cross map is if someone from Missouri is coming to California and they want to practice clinically, or they want to practice electronically, and they need the equivalent exam to what you have, it would be, they would have to have a PLCSW or an LCSW. So that would be the equivalent, if you will, the similar exam that you would look at. If they had any of those others, they have not taken the correct exam and they don't have the correct title. So it wouldn't translate into yours, and so you would say, can't help you on this one. Okay. And the PLCSW is private. So that's someone in private practice, and they make a distinction. And then the LCSW is someone not in private practice. Our concern is that the public could probably understand 3 categories of social work, although they probably can't. You know, a social worker is a social worker. They certainly can understand 56 different titles. So we're trying to make it easier. Okay, so the registry. Okay, what the registry that we currently have is, it's a repository for your professional life, for your professional papers and that. Okay, this is what we hear all the time. I lost my supervision. My CE, I don't have it. I don't know where it is. So 10 years ago, we developed a registry where social workers could send all their documentation to us. We would keep it and we do keep it electronically. And then when you need it, just come to us and we'll send it where you want us to. Okay. It was voluntary. It's an excellent program. We only have 2,000 social workers in it. So it's not robust. So in order to support mobility, we said we need to we need to have a new registry that people are going to get into. So I want to talk to you about, this is our plan. ASWB has made a commitment to take our registry and put it on steroids and make it affordable and make it available to those 500,000 social workers out there who are licensed. Okay. Now, that's not going to happen in my lifetime, I know that, but we'd like to get more and more social workers in there so that it will be a registry that our members can use as well for the mobility piece. And this is how the accountants are organized, and this is how the pharmacy is organized. They started out making a registry. The docs and the nurses have all of their docs and nurses are in a registry as well. That's why they can also do the kind of research that they're able to do about where doctors are located and where nurses are located. So we think that not only will this support mobility, but it's also going to support some better research about social work, the workforce, which we think is excellent. So we're also doing, we've hired a marketing survey consultant to work with our members and survey them about the use of the registry, and also social workers on the benefits of having a registry for them. And so as we get that data back, and they're conducting surveys and focus groups right now, so we get that data back, we will continue to refine the registry strategy. So it's a repository for social workers' credentialing information, and will also serve as a verification source for social work licensure boards. Okay. Right now, social workers, if they are getting multiple licenses or moving, they have to go through the whole process and provide all of the documentation that they already provided to the other jurisdiction all over again. What we hope is that the registry, by having all your data in the registry, that we would be able to keep that for you, and then when the social worker asks to move to another state, then we just have the state then go into the registry and verify it. Now, some of our members have to check with their laws and regs to see if they can accept verification source from ASWB as opposed to having to get it from the primary source. And so that's something that we're asking all of our members to check on. It establishes a permanent file containing the primary source records, and then it can be transmitted to any regulatory board, because all the boards are members of ASWB, you know, and this would be a service that we would have that they could use. It verifies, these are the information that we would have in there, the identity, and the social worker would be responsible as their identity changes, their demographics change, like they move, they get married, they change names and all that. They would go into the registry and update their information so that we would have, and they would have the most updated information. Their education, and as they get more education, that can all be put into the registry. Their social work exam results, we have them anyway, and so we would just transfer the exam results into their registry as they get them. Their licensing history, we would get that from you and all the other boards, so their history would be in there. Their clinical supervision, and that there will be a way of putting whatever form you require for clinical supervision would go into the registry. And again, consistency across the jurisdictions of requesting the same kind of supervisory experience is going to help, but even if not, we can figure all that out. And then any disciplinary actions as reported to our PPD, which we already have. So we already have a lot of this that we could populate the registry with the the licensed social worker's permission. Okay, so this is our website, and we'll be developing that. But I want to go back and talk a little bit more about what this registry is going to look like. And we are working on a model for it so that we'll have slides on that, but we're not there yet. We had looked at pharmacy and at the accountants' registries that they were using, and when my IT department, which had been one person, looked at that, he says, no, we can never do this, we can never do it, we're going to have to buy someone else's. The more we looked at it, we said, I think that's not the solution, we need to bump up our IT department. So now we have a 6-member IT department. Over the past 6 months, we have bumped up our IT department, so we're going to develop ours internally. But basically, if you think about a box, think about a a treasury box here, okay, that's secure and nobody can get into it without your permission as a social worker. Okay, so you're going to have a portal into it to put your information in to it. And it is secured by ASWB, so we're going to have a portal that we can get into it to make sure that we can verify information and all that. Okay, and then our members will be able to get in. So the jurisdictional boards will be able to go into another portal that is safe and secure and take a look at the data that's in this box. Okay. That's basically what it's going to look like and how it will function. So nobody, think of the Fort Knox, nobody gets in there who's not supposed to be in there, who doesn't have authorization. The way the social worker who would like to have their data shared with a different jurisdiction is they would send, they will notify ASWB, who has the members. ASWB will say, California, here's a wonderful social worker who's licensed in Guam at the clinical level, and they're coming to California and they want to get licensed in California. Go in and check out their data on the registry. California would go in, Kim would send whatever staff member is going to check on that. Check, 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 check. Everything matches. Or oops, they need this. And then that message goes back to the candidate that you need this. And then they get it and it gets into the registry, or they have to talk with California to satisfy California. If there's consistency, and a lot of consistency across it, this process can be done seamlessly and quickly, which again is the expedited part. And so that's our plan. How do we get social workers in there? Part of the marketing plan is going to help us with that. But one of the ideas that we have is that, as you saw the statistics, 45,000 folks are taking our exams on an annual basis, and that's continuing up. We're considering offering the registry as soon as we get it built. It's going to take another few months. That when you sign up to take the exam, you immediately get into the registry. We're getting a lot of the data already when they sign up to take the exam. Okay, so we're getting their demographics and that. When they take the exam and whatever happens with it, we have that data. We have the PPD data. We have their education. We already have that. And so we think that might be a nice way to populate the registry. The other way is when people want to practice virtually in other cross jurisdictions, then they would do that. We would do it through that. And then we'll eventually get up to the bigger numbers where it will be a very robust registry. Almost done, and it's probably time for lunch. Okay, we have in addition to our regular website, we have a website just for mobility, and we call it movingsocialwork.org. And you can go up on this, and any information that we have about mobility or any shifts and changes that ASWB is doing or messages from our members, we're putting that on that website. Right now, there's a lot of testimonials. We've asked folks who are having difficulty or are not having difficulty and agree with the strategies that we have to go up and testify on ours. And here's some of the testimonies and information that we have up there. So I threw a lot of information at you. Again, I hope the two-pager will be very helpful for you, and that will be up on our website. It should be up on our website now since it happened last night. At the Delegate Assembly, what the Mobility Task Force, and Kim is a member of our Mobility Task Force, and we've been very pleased with her input over past year that she's been on it. We are moving a resolution forward, and the resolution is asking our members to go back and look at their laws and regs to see if there is anything in their laws and regs that would be a barrier to them participating in this strategy. Okay? And ASWB staff is poised to help any jurisdiction that to do this review of laws and regs around these issues, around a registry, around accepting single source verified information, around the cross map about the titles. We're not asking people to change their titles. But, and then we'll take that information and then we'll be able to work with each of the jurisdictions in a way that makes sense for them moving forward within this framework. The thought is that we think that will be enough, that we don't need a compact, that the members can be trusting each other and making this process seamless with each other, and that it will be acceptable to the powers that be out there so that we don't have someone else's plan imposed upon social work. So, any questions or comments?
Mary Jo, I have one. Just very quick question. So when you talk about the traffic coming, about the transfer of the ASWB examination score, so you said New York being the first one and California being the second. Do you know which way it goes? Is it like people requesting to, transfer to California, out of California? Which way?
I don't have that detail yet, but we know that you're at the top of the list on both of those. But we'll have better data when we analyze it. The other thing is right now, people have said, how is the registry going to be financed? And it will be financed by the social workers who are in the registry. Right now, you pay a fee to be in the registry. Most likely, with the new registry, we will eliminate that fee so that we can get the volume in there. But what you will pay is when you have us transfer your information. And right now, you pay a fee to have your score transferred. So it'll be, instead of that being paid to the exam department, it will be paid to the registry department. Okay. And if we also think that employers would find this very helpful, and that employers might want to be seeing a transcript or making sure that the person is licensed and all that. And so employers, someone is going for a new job and their employer wants verification, that candidate, if they're in the registry, could call us and say, will you send my data to this employer? We could do that. The employer will not be able to get into the registry, but we would be able to send information out to employers. There's lots of things that we may not have even dreamed about that we'll be able to do for regulation, but also for the profession with this registry.
Thank you very much. If I may. I want to say thank you for asking me to sit on the mobility task force. I have a rather unique lens at the present moment because we are a composite board. So, and I'm finding it extremely interesting that all three of the professions are really starting to move in that direction. So this is one framework. We'll talk about another one with MFTs. We'll also talk about LPCCs. But not today. But at our November meeting, my hope is I would get some direction from the board in terms of how you want to proceed with this particular plan, because I will be attending that delegate meeting in November, and so that's what I would be looking for. Oh, there it goes. and with that, oh, sorry.
Janley Wong with NASW. Thank you very much, Mary Jo. That was an excellent presentation. I'm actually pretty excited after hearing your presentation about the registry, and I think it's desperately needed. And I like your ideas about the changing the cost structure, because that's a major impediment to professionals. I also think there are other avenues that would be interesting to explore. Perhaps you've already done this, in particular the criminal background check portion, as well as employment history. And I'm hoping someday in the future there'll be query capability, because we often get questions about who can supervise me, who's eligible, who's qualified to supervise me. And at some point, I know there are some of these databases out there already that are interactive, but I'm looking for someone who's qualified in private practice. So all of these have a lot of potential for the registry that you're talking about, and could yield a lot of benefits for consumers as well as consumer protection and employers. Thank you.
Generally, we already have something that I think your members would be very excited about. We have a laws and rules database that takes all of the laws and rules of all of our members in the 64 jurisdictions that I talked about, and it is now public. And anyone can go up on our website and click on the laws and rules database, and you can query into every one of our members' database. Well, we have the data, and you can do a report of, say you're in California and you want to move to Minnesota. Okay, that would be a rough transition, I think, for many of you, but if you would, you can go in and query a report on what are the qualifications, all the regs for California, and then get a comparison report to what's in Minnesota, everything that you need to do in order to get licensed in Minnesota. And we are asking social work educators to do this in the classroom and as an assignment, so that students can understand that they can move from state to state and be prepared for that. So that's already out there. I think that, we are getting more and more hits as I go out and talk and other people go out and talk. The other thing about criminal background checks, that's not universal yet for any licenses. And editorial comment, why wouldn't you require a criminal background check? But not all jurisdictions do, so that's why it wasn't one of the criteria. Most likely, though, if you want to get licensed in another jurisdiction that requires a criminal background check, that'll be something that will happen. And it'll just be one of those additional requirements that would have to be matched. So you may not need it in one state where you originally got licensed, but you're going to need it to practice in the other states. The nurses tried to put it in their compact that you had to have the criminal background check, and that's part of why they had to redo their compact, because states were saying we're just not going to make it a requirement.
Any further comments? Questions? Okay, we are going to break for lunch and back at 1:45. Thank you. Oh, it is now 12:15. 1:30? 1:30? Okay. All right. 5. You need me, do we need to call for a quorum? No. No. Okay. We have a request to move item number 14. I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry. Number 16. Item number 16, we're moving up to item 14, which is the discussion and possible action regarding association of marital Family therapy regulatory proposed mobility pathway. That's going to be right now. Okay, Kim?
Righty. Okay, so just a little history. At the 2015 annual AMFTRB delegate meeting, the member boards called for AMFTRB to explore the regulation of teletherapy and mobility of licensure across the jurisdictions. Out of that request came two committees, the Mobility Work Group and Teletherapy Committee. And the Mobility Work Group was charged with exploring current efforts with other professionals and to develop recommendations for licensed mobility for marriage and family therapists, and to present those recommendations to the delegates. The work group worked with representatives from AMFTRB, COAMFT, which is the Commission on Accreditation for Marriage and Family Education, AAMFT, which is the American Association of Marriage and Family Therapy, and CAMT, which is the California Association of Marriage and Family Therapists, as well as regulatory boards. The Teletherapy Committee was charged with developing guidelines for the regulation of teletherapy and to explore other associated issues. And so both of these committees gathered the information and soon discovered that their work began to overlap. So AMFTRB decided to develop or establish what they call a super committee, sort of a merging of those two committees, and they set a meeting date for July 14th and 15th of this year in Denver, Colorado, and the BBS was asked to participate in that meeting. So I went back out and sat with these lovely group, and our charge was to develop a pathway for licensure mobility. So and CAMT was also present. Ann Tran represented CAMT. So what we did is we kind of walked through the history and we looked at what other professions were doing, what was working, what was not working, what was the level of participation. And some improvements have been made across all the professions. And as you heard from Mary Jo this morning, not all the states are buying into all of that. And you've got some compliance with some pieces and components and not with the compacts and maybe some interstate agreements, but not all 50 states are on board. So we looked at those efforts and then we decided to look at the commonalities and the responsibilities for each state during the licensure process. We identified obviously public protection as being a key component and our primary responsibility. We looked at common requirements for licensure within each state. Each state for marriage and family therapists licensure, you need to have a master's degree. You need to have supervised work experience. Each state requires some level of testing for licensure. And so that was kind of interesting to start looking at all those commonalities for licensure. So once we looked at that, then we began to shift our thought process. So many states are focused on substantially equivalent. You come into California, you need to have substantially equivalent education experience. So we started asking ourselves the question, what about adequacy and trust? And specifically, are you trusting your neighboring state to do their due diligence to properly vet someone who's actually approaching their regulatory board with the same education and background that they come to us with? So that once we kind of got off that, mindset and went to adequacy and trust, we were able to develop a proposal that I'm going to outline for you today. And this core proposal is going to be presented to the delegates at the AMFTRB regulatory meeting in the early part of October. I do have a request to go in and attend that meeting, and hopefully it will be approved. So thinking about adequacy and trust, they came up with these 5 components. The individual that's applying to any state must be licensed at least one renewal cycle. Most renewal cycles are 2 years. There is a state, I want to say Massachusetts, but I'm not entirely sure. They have annual renewal. So the individual coming to California would already be licensed. The individual must have obtained a professional graduate degree program in marriage and family therapy from an accredited program. We're not looking at units, we're looking at did you go to something at that particular time that was an accredited school. They have to have a valid license that's not restricted or currently disciplined. They must have completed postgraduate supervised clinical experience is a requirement for licensure. Again, we're not going to be looking at the number of hours that they have put in, but rather, did you have to do that? Because that varies across the states. For example, Florida requires 6,000 hours. They count everything. Some states only count clinical, 1,500 clinical hours, that's it. And then the individual must have passed either the National MFT Clinical Exam for licensure or the California exam for licensure. So this would, if the states were to adopt this, then that would mean our licensees coming out of California now have the ability for portability and don't have to take a second test for but what this does do is it does allow each state to retain their other specific licensure requirements. So for California, we would still say you need to fingerprint and you would need to do a law and ethics exam. And most often, if you're coming from out of state, then you would probably take the law and ethics prep course to pass the exam. So when in looking at this particular proposal, and if it's something that we want to consider, I think it answers a couple of different key barriers to licensure when you're coming into out of state. The educational component, yes, we've moved to 60-unit degree requirements. Most states have already done so. And at some point, the 48-unit folk are going to retire out. But it does recognize that you went to an accredited school and you had education in marriage and family therapy systems. So, so it's going to provide folks who have older degree programs the ability to move in to California, as opposed to us saying, nope, sorry, you need to go get 12 more units or a brand new master's degree. So Renee, if you were an MFT, you could move to another state. The postgraduate clinical experience is another huge hurdle that we experience here in California. We require 3,000 hours. It's a combination of clinical and non-clinical hours. What this does is recognize that you had to have a baseline of clinical hours, and it recognizes that you're fully licensed, and if you've been licensed for at least one renewal cycle, I think it's reasonable to assume that they've been practicing and probably seeing, clients up to 30 to 40 hours working that type of a work week. So it allows them to count for that experience. And I would be able to avoid saying, I'm sorry, I know you've been licensed 20 years, but you need to go do 1,500 hours. The other thing it does is it recognizes both the national exam and the California exam. And that's huge because it will allow portability both ways. We would have to, if we like this proposal, the board would need to agree to accept the national MFT licensure exam, and then other states would need to acknowledge that California is a recognized exam. Oregon just passed regulations to recognize California as a clinical exam that's acceptable for them. There are other states that have already done that. The other thing this does, if we have mobility, and since we're all moving in that direction, it seems, it's whether you want to go or not, we need to go. And it really addresses the teletherapy services that are happening across lines already. You're able to meet the licensure requirements without leaving California or your state. You can do it all online, and you come in and you do your practice. And you're probably continuing to practice in this, treating that same population that you were treating in your home state. It also allows us to, do our own requirements, such as our law and ethics, the fingerprints, there's some pros and cons to it. So we've had sitting here in this board, because we license 3 different professions, and the 3 or 4, but the 3 are really looking at portability. Everybody has sort of some commonalities, but some different nuances to their portability plan. But I can tell you that portability is coming, and I think it's a matter of whether we want to decide what that looks like for California, or if we want to let someone else impose what it's going to look like in California. And the Little Hoover Commission met last year to talk about barriers to occupational licensure. It's now coming to the attention of the federal government. The FTC just held a task force meeting at the end of July, and a lot of information was shared about state agreements, compacts, and how we can improve portability for licensure. So it's, I think the climate is really it's I don't know, ripe, appropriate. The time, I think it's a good opportunity for us to craft something or think about crafting something that's going to work to improve portability. And we really see it a lot with the LPCC group. That's, I think, out of all the professions we're regulating, that's the group that's getting hit the hardest. So I'm sharing all this information and with you and would like your feedback. I mean, we've heard one presentation. Here's a second. I can bring back the NBC presentation. We can do a chart comparing pros and cons. What pieces do we like? How do we want to shape that? But I really want. I think that this is coming, and it would be nice to be not the last state to join something, but maybe the first state to do something. So I'll leave it up to you to discuss amongst yourselves.
Any questions? Yes, Peter?
Please excuse me, I'm not too familiar with all these, but let's say if one of our California MFT have a patient move to Massachusetts, will that help that situation?
Yes, it would. Because Massachusetts uses the National MFT Exam. Right now, if California MFT goes out there, they're licensed here, but they're going to get out to Massachusetts, and Massachusetts will tell them, you need to take the national exam for licensure. So now that individual needs to sit through another 4-hour exam and then meet whatever other requirements are out there.
So I just want to make sure I asked the question correct. I am saying that if the client moved to Massachusetts, so
the client? Yeah. So then if the states adopt this, what this would do is that the licensee in California could then apply to Massachusetts to be licensed. And because Massachusetts had agreed to recognize our exam as a clinical exam, the path to licensure in Massachusetts would be much simpler. And the way this proposal is going to work is that there's a form in your packet. It's developed we drafted it the day during the meeting. And this form, where it verifies your license, the date it was issued, your disciplinary action, your licensure exam, your education, and your supervised clinical experience, this particular form is only going to go to your initial state of licensure. So they would verify all of this information. If I were to get it, then I would check the box and say, that's great. Maybe we would look at some of the other states that they're licensed, make sure they have a valid license there. And then from that point, I would tell the applicant, okay, you're good to go, but you're going to need to pass a California Law and Ethics exam, which they can take because it's offered through a testing service that has testing centers throughout the country. And they can do all of that from where they're residing. They don't need to come out to California. Yes. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Leah?
Okay, you had said fingerprinting, law and ethics exam, and it seems like there was something else you said, and okay, those were the two pieces that we would add.
Right.
Yeah, my only other hesitation would be culture. California culture's wanting to require a CE on that. So it seems to me, I don't know what the magic number is, but people who are seasoned and have been providing therapy in other places have demonstrated their safety to practice. I had talked with Steve earlier about it'd be interesting to see at what stage in people's career do they get in trouble, not with DUI convictions, but rather with confidentiality, dual relationship, those other types of ethical, legal issues. Because if it's early career and we say, oh yeah, most people make those mistakes in their first 5 years of licensure, then we say, okay, 5 years is the magic number. But if it's mid-career, there's nothing we're going to be able to do about that anyway to avoid that. But it seems to me this is something we need to look at and pursue, because it's absurd that somebody could practice for 20 years in another state, not get in trouble, do a great job, and because their degree is 20 years old, they can't practice here. So for seasoned people. And then the hard part is, what is the magic number? Like, how did they come up with 4 years? And I would want to make that, if possible, consistent across the three professions, if possible.
Yeah, I know. I'm trying to recall. NBCC is proposing a 3 to 5 year threshold. I want to say 3, but I'm not entirely sure. The rationale for the MFT group to land on a renewal cycle is that we thought that we took into account that, okay, you had to do supervised experience. So you've been doing some practice. And if you're in a 2-year renewal cycle in your state, that's a significant period of time that you've been practicing. I would like, in a perfect world, in terms of determining when, when that oops is going to happen and when it doesn't. I don't think we know. We can set up, right now we have them do clinical experience here in California. Does that assure me that that person is going to not ever violate a law? No, I have no assurance. And then so when we kind of had that roundtable discussion, and then we came back to, well, what is it that we're really testing for when they come in for initial licensure? It's minimum competency to safely practice.
So the only question that I would have is whether it's a renewal cycle or 4 years or whatever, I would want them to have been practicing during that time.
Right.
Right. And when you look at that, I don't know how you assess that, but we're kind of assessing that anyway for people who are transferring from other states, right?
We don't assess whether they're practicing. We never ask that question. We just, how long have you had the license? The assumption is you've been practicing.
So in Texas, I had my license for 10 years before we had our license here.
Right.
I was not practicing.
Thank you.
So, right. But do you see what I'm saying?
Exactly.
Like, so if I came here and I hadn't been practicing for 10 years, that's a little bit different to me. Even if it's just under penalty of perjury or something, or if there's something that they can prove that they've had. I don't know how that would happen, but that would just be my only concern, is that people are holding onto their license like I did, and for whatever reason aren't practicing, and then like try to start practicing. That would be a little bit more anxiety provoking for me.
Right.
Overall, I like this idea of portability. We've been talking about it in counseling for 10 years now.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But I think now that it's gotten state and federal attention,
and online, right, telehealth, that's really
they're
made a
doing it
difference.
anyway.
Yeah.
They're doing it anyway.
Yeah.
I'm also I also agree. I like the board being proactive on the conversation as well. So just for my understanding, so how does it look like, and maybe the law and ethics are covering this aspect of, we have some population in California are fully protected, which are not in other states.
Correct.
Because of my agency, I deal a lot of people coming from out of state, perhaps undergoing reparative therapy and things like that. So I'm definitely comfortable when people are moving to California, and maybe through law ethics, and I might be wrong, they are covering this aspect of. But so what's going to happen when you have a MFT, let's say, is moving to Texas again? And then all of a sudden, they had to apply. Actually, no, I'm going to go for something even. The consent for minors to have therapy in California is way more extended and way more flexible than it is in Florida. So you're moving to Florida, all of a sudden, what was legal here in California is not in Florida, and now the MFT gets in trouble. Now, I understand that once they move there, Florida will require some particular sets of educational so that people can get up to speed to what's okay there or not. But so at that point, that person who moves to Florida, it gets in trouble because all of a sudden they're serving a minor without the consent of the adults. Which is okay in California if they're under circumstances of safety, blah, blah, blah. So how, at that point, they're getting in trouble with the local board, right? Let's say they've been reported, and so how that correlates to their license here. So how does it work, pretty much? I'm trying to envision, first of all, how do we set up additional, if it's needed, instrument to protect those populations that are more vulnerable, and they are definitely more protected in California than in the majority of other states. And two, if so, how that really will work in terms of relationships within the states and the licensee.
Right. So if I heard the question correctly, it's what's okay to do here in California because the law allows us to do it, but maybe it's a little different in another state, and that state finds you in violation and disciplines that license.
Correct.
What would we do? We would treat it like any other complaint, and because we do have the authority, if they have been disciplined in another state, we can initiate an action. Now, whether we decide to do so or not, that would be our call. I struggle to think that I would find what we would find legal here and a violation in another state, and then they've been disciplined. I mean, what would be the appropriate level of discipline? Clearly, I can't see us revoking the license here in California. I just can't see us doing that. It doesn't seem right. But, maybe it's one of those situations where you close it, you acknowledge that you got the information, and, maybe the instruction to the licensee is be aware of those state laws that may differ from where you normally practice. Is something like that. Nothing too detrimental, but just enough to, that's what Cite and Fine is for CE. Remember,
Right.
You're supposed to do this. So, I don't know, but that's a bridge we could look at, and that's a consideration as well.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the general trend definitely is moving towards mobility and portability. I don't think we can stop that train at all. So I think the bottom line is that, when we look at, the MFT program is a little more unique. I think Ben will probably can attest to it. The fact is that, it's not a national curriculum. So, so there's that very wide variety, about like the education background and stuff like that. So my biggest, I think the information I need is how do we guarantee that, people come to California, or I'm not like Max. I'm not so worried about they going out, because I think, we have the majority of the, we have 60% of the MFTs in the nationwide. So I'm more concerned about, if people come to California, how do we make sure that, they understand, the very unique, the culture and the population that we serve in California. It is, because of the cultural complexity. So, so when I look at, the 5 points, there's nothing much that we try to address, for one, how do we protect consumers? Well, so, and the other thing is also, sorry about that. It's about, the MFT actually changed their curriculum back in the, 2012, and put that heavy emphasis on the, on the wellness and recovery model. And so that is very unique, in the nation. And so I understand about the differences, but at the same time, you really still are talking about a pretty much change of the emphasis, so I want to make sure that, from the consumer protection point of view, that, the licensee come in, that they are actually culturally competent, and then be able to also fit into what, the design of the current MFT curriculum. So that's my little input. So I would actually like to see more data.
Yeah, because you leave California prescribes what needs to be in the degree program. You leave California and it's co-empty. They have the direction of what's included. It's no different than the social work education group. So, and it's no different than KCREP for LPCCs. They prescribe, those entities prescribe the education. California is a little different in that our MFT law says you need to have A, B, C, and by the way, get E, F, and G. So what would be helpful, I think, for you, Christina, is for me to get the COAMP, the education guidelines, and lay that out for you and compare it to what we require. And then in terms, everybody's getting cultural competence right now. That's a big buzzword across all the disciplines. And I say that with confidence because I've been at all those national meetings. So that's been good. But if someone's coming into California, they're primarily doing it for 2 reasons. Either one, they're relocating and they're going to set up practice here. So my guess primarily is they're going to continue to see the population that they've always been seeing. Not that they don't need that cultural education, but consumers are going to be protected because they already got the bare baseline education, and that's the population they're treating. Or they have a student, again, that they've been treating, they're coming to college, and that's the population they're going to treat. And then I'm going to just go on a limb here. Most responsible practitioners, if they're going to expand that treatment, they're going to educate themselves I can't see anyone coming in without any background and, let's say, transgender issues, and then say, I'm going to open up and put my shingle out. I'm going to treat transgender youth. I mean, they're going to need the information. So, and there's the portability plans, I think, that we're looking at across the 3 disciplines does not limit us to say, hey, you might need a course in cultural competency as well. And maybe the allowance is you get your license and within a year or by your next renewal cycle, you need to complete that course. But it gets them in here. It gets them under our jurisdiction. And so if they are crossing state lines with the teletherapy, then if something happens, we can do something. Right now, I can't, other than hit them with a $2,500 fight and fine. Yes.
Just in reaction to that, with the cultural piece, that is, I guess, when we look at the history of the 3 professions, a newer sort of construct that's been worked on. So there might be older licenses who practice in homogeneous environments and then come here and they don't know what they don't know.
Exactly.
So that's what I like, the idea of, okay, we give it to you and you have to complete this within the first renewal cycle. I think culture is the one thing, like if it's transgender, that seems more obvious of a cultural difference, but if somebody is a second generation immigrant, they may not understand sort of the nuances in that experience. So I really want to push for that one piece.
And none of these proposals prohibit us from doing that.
Yeah. Okay.
What we're trying to do is just acknowledge what you had as you entered and not make you repeat it.
Questions from the board? Comments? Okay, I'd like to open it up to the public.
Ben Caldwell, AMFT California. Kim, thank you for the presentation. Thank you for your work with AMFT-RB on this. Of course, the devil's in the details about how do you respond to those kinds of specific concerns about people coming in or going out of state. But I think you put it pretty well, Kim, that this is going to happen one way or another. So for the BBS to be kind of proactive in your involvement with the plans of the professions, I think is appropriate and forward-looking as it should be. We organizationally are highly supportive of this proposal, the aims of the proposal, and the form that it's taking. A couple of specific questions, understanding that these may not have been answered at this point. On the section here where you talk about education, it's discussed that people would need an accredited degree. And because you're right in saying that around most of the rest of the country, the issue there is COAMFT accreditation, but in California, it's more regional accreditation. I wondered whether that had been discussed as an issue, and would the standard be that either one is okay?
The standard's going to be, either one's going to be okay.
Okay.
And generally, most folks are going to an accredited institution anyway. Otherwise, you don't get the federal loan reimbursement.
Right.
So.
Okay. Thank you. And then the second question relates to telehealth. And I'm not sure whether this has been answered. I'm not sure whether it would need to be answered. But would this proposal put states on the same page in terms of where they are understanding therapy takes place when a therapist and their client are in different states? My understanding is that right now, most states assume that therapy takes place where the client is physically located at the time of service. And I know the CAMFT Code of Ethics reflects that. But I also know that there has been some discussion of other viewpoints in other states. I don't know the status of it right now, but I know the New Mexico Licensing Board for a minute was kicking around the idea that therapy takes place wherever the practitioner happens to be licensed, which is troubling. So I wondered whether this proposal would formally get boards on the same page and how they think about that, or whether it was sort of going to remain in the hands of each board to view that as they see fit.
Well, just based on the individuals in the room, we were all of the same mindset. It's where the client is. And that was kind of the nice piece about this, is you could get your license sitting in your home state and it didn't matter where the client was because you're getting licensed there. But I certainly could see where it would motivate everybody to land on that same definition. So, but that's a good point that we can ask Ms. Berg-Lois about.
Yeah. I mean, it's certainly not the kind of thing that would be, that would break the rest of it in terms of how we look at it. It's just it's a worthwhile consideration.
Exactly. Well, and that was one of the challenges I think the teletherapy committee ran into. So,
Thank you.
you're welcome. Thank you.
Just for clarification, because I wasn't sure I heard correctly in the first part that Ben was asking, would it need to be a co-AMFT accredited program or no?
No, it's regionally accredited.
University.
Regionally accredited,
Got it.
or you went to a co-AMFT accredited program
Got it.
school.
Okay.
So,
Got
and by and large, as I was saying, you find they're both.
Yeah. No, that's, yeah. And then the second thought that I had is, I wonder if it would be helpful to have a subcommittee meet once or twice with stakeholders to bat around some ideas and brainstorm and then bring it to the board.
Yeah.
I would be willing to chair that committee.
Sophie.
It's a really important
It's an
topic.
important
My daughter
thing.
will kill me and
Maybe we just
I'll
meet down your way.
deal with it.
Yeah.
So I don't know if anybody else wants to do that with me, but this is just a really important topic to me. So
Right.
I was about to ask the next step because it looks like, so Kim, so I'm not, maybe you can give us some idea, what you're looking for. And thanks, Leah, for that idea. I would really prefer to look at it in more details. And so if you want, it seems like, you want the board to kind of agree on the general direction that we're going. So, I think that's a really important idea that, how we look at it in details because there's still, we are so heavily regulated.
Right.
I don't think we can agree on the direction, but
Right.
If in legislation it doesn't work, then we really have to kind of figure it out.
No, we would need some legislative changes. Absolutely. So yes, this would need a committee thing. But what I would be looking for from the board would be some direction or either in concept that maybe the direction is simply let's look at portability. Using those three models that are already out there and kind of like the cafeteria, we like this point, this point, this point, and then kind of come to an agreement and then figure out the nuances that are specific to us because none of these plans prohibit us from doing that. None of them. But it does, I think what we're conceptually having to, and it seems like you guys are willing to do that, is to move forward and just agree that, there's some education. We don't want to make people who have been licensed many years, a few years, repeat their supervised clinical experience again, and that we are willing to trust that our neighboring states have done a good job of vetting out someone to enter the profession at the level that we test our candidates for, and that's minimum competency. So, and then after that, then we can figure out what we want to do.
and are we exploring again the co-AMFT or the MFT exam?
Mhm.
Is that coming up again? So 'cause
We're gonna
that
look
also
at
might
it.
make it easier too.
Yeah, we're looking at that, and it could make it easier. I mean, and then maybe at that point, if all 50 states say, yeah, we'll take A or B, then we can keep our exam, which is probably more robust in the cultural interest. The nuances that we have here in California that probably don't apply to the Midwest at all. So, but I like the direction of just accepting education, not making people jump through supervised clinical experience anymore, and you had to at least take a clinical exam somewhere.
I think in light of what I'm hearing from the board, and I think making, it's always better to be on the front end than it is to try to defend the back end, especially since this train is moving at lightning speed. No one's going to sit around and wait for us. So you can either get and be part of the conversation up front, or then it just seems like you're defensive and you're coming in from the back end. So you can, I don't know, I think this board is very progressive and it likes to lay the groundwork, not sit and complain about someone else's groundwork and then try to fix it so that it works. So I have been assured by counsel here that I can do this. So I am going to establish the pathway to mobility committee. So that is done. And I like the inclusion of as many people as possible who would like to give us input. And I'd like to add one more thing. If there's a possibility that the chair of this committee has or if it works, an opportunity to go with you. I think that since we are at this, I know it's difficult to get clearance, but all they can say is no. But I just think when we're trying to establish something as crucial as this, that the more parties that are invited to the game, that we will have a better idea and be part of the conversation. And instead of you coming back and trying to convince the board in any way, shape, or form, right?
I haven't sold you yet.
We would have it, and also I would be nice if this is where we're heading, and this is a big deal.
It's huge.
It's a huge deal. And so I would like if the chairperson would be able to, and the agency would allow the person to go, I would like that to be an opportunity. I would like to name Leah chair because she volunteered. And it's not easy to get chairs. And anyone else on this board that is interested, here we are right now, to sit on this committee, step forward.
How many people are you looking at?
Pardon?
How many people are you looking at?
I think for any of the committees, it's always best to have at least 3.
So will this be only looking at MFT or
No, it's going to be
look at all three of them?
This is the whole train.
All 3. I want to do it across.
I would love
My preference
to.
would be if we do. Here's the thing: if we don't do it for all 3, whoever we gotta. Yeah, it's a problem. So we want to do. No, the 3 committees fine. I'm just saying we want to look at all disciplines.
Right.
Yeah.
I would love to be part of it.
Now remember, you do not have the right to back out. So this is a commitment, people. Okay, so anyone else?
Laura, speaking.
You want to?
I don't know.
I personally don't see this as being a really long committee because we already have the basic framework. I can see us having 2, 3 meetings. Yeah, and then that's it. I could make adjustments that way. I don't think all in Sacramento because I think Sophie would get mad at us.
Well, you have 2 members. If Renee accepts, then we'd have 2 in Southern California.
Right, and so the staff and I, we can alternate. Mm-hmm. Renee?
Sold.
I don't think we're going to even go that long.
And if we do, hopefully someone else would step up to take your spot. Okay.
And you could attend as a public member.
All right.
Stakeholder. The feedback. Yeah.
So the committee is formed, and we have 3 members, so they will always be noticed. So I'm sure, Kim, you'll be in contact with these 3 individuals, and you guys can work on your calendars and move forward. But please, I really do encourage those that the organizations, we need your input. We need your participation because this is going to be a big endeavor. And like I said, it's better to get everybody's input and move everyone forward at the same time than it is to try and patch it together later on. Because then it just becomes an adversarial type of activity instead of a very positive one. And again, this is California. So we'll end up probably being the model for the rest of the country, which we seem to be in almost everything we do. So congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
This is exciting. All right.
So
see how many more committees we can do today. Yeah. No, I'm just kidding. All right. Christina.
Yeah. Webcast. Why not? Basically, that means Caesar gets to come with us everywhere we go.
I can understand. Okay. Mr. Lee.
Stanley Wong, NASW. I commend the board and the chair for forming this committee. It's really important, and especially the executive officer who's done a lot of work on this, actually. I do want to make sure the committee considers some important ethical differences between the states regarding practice. So probably the most glaring example is reparative therapy or sexual orientation change efforts, banned in California for minors, but legal in many, many states across the country. So I want the committee to kind of consider that, like, okay, we have our therapists here licensed. They know it's not only illegal but unethical to practice that way. They go to another state, maybe they'll start practicing it because it's lucrative. So that's really an open-ended question, you know. How do we handle that? Do we or not handle it or whatever? I'm not aware of any other situation regarding this next one, but it's possible given the climate in this country, which is to report clients who are undocumented. If there is a situation like that anywhere in this country, especially like Arizona, where you could commit a federal offense and be pardoned by the president, then I think that should also be under consideration. It's just an example. I don't really know if that's the case, but we have these differences between the states in terms of practice. We really should have our committee look at it.
Yeah, and my apologies, Mr. Wong.
No, those are good considerations.
Today we've heard from the National Social Work Associations and the MFT. I just wanted to go on record for the LPCCs to say that the American Association of State Counseling Boards has had a portability plan. I don't know, I worked on that committee maybe 10 years ago when Kim now goes to those meetings, but we certainly have been trying to promote portability for many years for LPCs, and it's just a matter of the states buying in. I'm very glad to hear that California is going to be on board.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions? Any more comments from the public? Right. Moving on. We have we're going to turn it over now to Roseanne.
Hey, so our next item of discussion is a potential legislative proposal for this next upcoming year. And the topic of discussion has to do with MFT referral service registrations. Currently, the board in its law has some statute requiring it to issue MFT referral service registrations, and that we want to discuss whether the board believes these registrations are necessary to ensure public protection. So existing law says a few things about what a licensee can do when offering services. It prohibits one of our licensees, or actually any healing arts practitioner, from offering, receiving, or accepting any kind of rebate, refund, or preference, anything monetary or non-monetary, as compensation for referring patients or clients to someone. The existing law also makes it unprofessional conduct for an LMFT to do this for referral of clients specifically in our unprofessional conduct section. And also all healing arts practitioners are prohibited from advertising in any manner that's false or fraudulent or misleading. In the mid-90s, a provision was added to the code, Business and Professions Code 650.4, that states that a marriage and family therapist or a person is allowed to participate or operate a group advertising or referral service for marriage and family therapists if certain conditions are met. The patient referrals have to be patient initiated. The referral service cannot employ a solicitor. It can't impose a fee dependent on the number of referrals that's paid for by the patient. The service has to register with the Board of Behavioral Sciences and provide the board with a copy of its contracts that regulates its relationship with its members. And it requires certain things in the advertising of the referral service. The board is required for any violations of this law to revoke an MFT referral service registration. The law also states that it's unlawful and a misdemeanor for a person to operate a group advertising and referral service for marriage and family therapists without registering with the board. And the law states that it's not the intention of this section to otherwise affect the prohibitions about referring services for compensation, and that the legislature intends to allow pooling of resources by marriage and family therapists for the purposes of advertising. So this section came into place, like I said, in the mid-90s, 1995, and the board subsequently also adopted regulations regarding how a referral service can register with the board. The bill that put this provision about the registration of referral services was sponsored by CAMFT, and in the bill analysis, what the reasons cited for running the bill were that the law already had similar provisions for dentists and chiropractors, and the bill was actually modeled after those provisions. CAMFT had stated that Business and Professions Code 650, which is a section stating it's generally unlawful for healing arts licensees to accept compensation for patient referrals, was unnecessarily prohibiting many otherwise legitimate referral services from operating. And so this bill would clarify the conditions under which they could operate. So when this section became law, the board began issuing the registrations. However, the issuance of the registrations dropped off suddenly in 2002 and 2003. We're not really sure why. They just sort of stopped. There's not really any type of memo or board materials discussing a reason for this shift. They just sort of fell off. So it's unclear if the registration ceased due to a change in board policy or if just there was a lack of demand for the registrations. We don't really know. Currently, the board has 25 registered MFT referral services. They never expire. They were issued mostly between 1998 and 2003. They're shown in attachment D in your packet. There were 3 that were issued after 2003, the last one being in 2010. But when we switched over to the BREEZE system currently does not have the capacity to built into it to issue MFT referral service registrations. In terms of how we issued them, when we were issuing them, there's no fee charged for an issuance of one of these registrations. They don't need to be renewed. Right now, all of them list an expiration date of January 1, 2050, which is likely a computer system default. We discussed this issue at the Policy and Advocacy Committee meeting and whether the registrations serve a need to protect the public. And the committee concluded based on that discussion that the registrations are outdated and no longer needed, and recommended that the board pursue legislation to strike Business and Profession Code section 650.4. And I've shown the striking of that language in attachment A. Also in your attachments, you can find the analysis from the original bill that established the referral services, as well as some information about the referral services that we have currently in our system.
Discussion? Yes, Leah?
Seems to me with the internet and Google, it's not really necessary anymore. I would imagine, at least recently, that would do a drop off. So this makes a lot of sense to me.
Good point. Anyone else have a comment? Oh, okay.
Ben Caldwell, AMFT California. We appreciate your taking a look at this. We don't see any need to continue to have this registration provision. If you want to get super technical and strict about it, you could make an argument that any online directory of family therapists is currently in violation of these standards, as might be the people participating in it. So rather than risk some kind of action against oneself for simply putting their profile on Psychology Today, might be better to just delete these provisions. We would support that.
Yes, Peter? Yes.
Your microphone's not on.
I would like to move that the board pursue legislation to strike BPC Section 650.4 as recommended by the Policy and Advocacy Committee.
And I'll second it.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? Okay, call for the vote, please.
Dr. Leah Brew.
Aye.
Max Disposti.
Aye.
Mara Ashley.
Aye.
Christina Wong.
Aye.
Deborah Brown.
Aye.
Betty Conley. Renee Launer.
Yes.
Dr. Christine Whitlisbach.
Yes.
Dr. Peter Chu.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay, and we're going to take a 10-minute break. So we'll be back here at, looks like 2:46, 2:47.